going to introduce us.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. Thank you, Lexi.
Recording in progress.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this evening. I'm Mayor Ashley Stolzman, and because of COVID-19, the meeting's being held electronically and is being recorded. This is the Tuesday, September 7th, 2021 Louisville City Council meeting. There are going to be several public comment periods, so we'll have comments on items not on the agenda, and then each topic will have public comments during. If you'd like to speak during public comment, you'll find a raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Please click that. If you've called in by phone, you can dial *9 and we'll see a raise hand appear on your behalf. When I call on someone and the clerk unmutes you, please tell us your name and your address, and then tell us what you'd like to tell us. You'll have about 3 minutes, and there will be a timer on the screen. And thank you for following those directions to help us maintain meeting decorum. And so, City Clerk Muth, could we please have a roll call?
Mayor Stolzman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Here.
Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Here.
Councilmember Fahey?
Here.
Councilmember Lay?
Here.
Councilmember Lipton?
Here.
Thank you, everyone. Could I please get a motion to approve the agenda?
Is this where I would pull something off consent?
Nope.
Okay, then I will second.
Thank you. There was a motion from Councilmember Brown and a second from Councilmember Fahey. Any discussion of approval of the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. That takes us to our public comments on items that are not on our agenda or items that are on our consent agenda. If any members of the public would care to comment tonight on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand and let us know what you'd like to tell us. Again, it's just let us know your name, your address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Our first commenter tonight is Larry Donner. Hi, Larry.
Hi, my name is Larry Donner. I live at 1020 Willow Place in Louisville. The FBI defines a hate crime as, quote, a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity, end quote. On September 5th, the St. Louis Catholic Church was vandalized with abortion graffiti, clearly a hate crime under the FBI's definition. I was disappointed by the city's tepid classification of this crime as only bias-motivated criminal mischief. There's clearly a double standard at work here. I can only imagine what the city's classification would have been if a mosque or synagogue were involved rather than a Catholic church. There is no place for any type of religious hatred in Louisville. We need to declare this behavior for what it is and prosecute under hate crime legislation. Hate begets hate. If the city doesn't shut this type of behavior down early, it will only get worse. Declare this criminal behavior for what it is and pursue it as a hate crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donner. Any other members of the public care to comment this evening? Next up, we have Brad Walker. Hi, Brad.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Will there be I'm assuming my comments now, there will be an opportunity to comment later about an agenda item, correct?
Yes. So this
Okay.
section is for public comments on items not on the agenda, and then each agenda item also has public comments pertaining to that agenda item.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to check, so I'll just sit tight until later.
All right. Any other members of the public care to comment on items not on our agenda tonight, or items that show up on our consent agenda? All right, seeing none, that takes us back over to council member topics, and we're onto the consent agenda. I know Councilmember Fahey would like to make a proposal to pull something from the consent agenda. Councilmember Fahey?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would propose to remove approval of proclamation designating every September as Louisville History Month be brought off the consent onto the full agenda.
Great, and so we will move item D from consent agenda and place it as item G for a proclamation of History Month. And I'm just noting it down so we don't miss it. All right, any other discussion of the consent agenda?
Motion
Could I
to
get a-
approve the consent agenda.
as amended?
As amended, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second,
Great. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. This takes us to our council informational comments on pertinent items not on the agenda. Councilmember Lay.
Yeah. My comment really follows Mr. Donner's comment a few moments ago. I was, as I think all of us were, shocked at what happened at the St. Louis Catholic Church this weekend. I'm not sure, that everybody knows all about that, but there was graffiti that was sprayed all over on at least 3 sides of the church. And there's no way to really paint that as anything but bad news. And I've spoken before about this, but I would agree that that kind of conduct takes speech completely out of the protected category that it is. It's not a matter of doctrine. It's not a matter of protest. It's just lawlessness. And it's stupid, but it's also reprehensible. And it needs to be dealt with very significantly. Now, I'm not going to comment on the police handling of it. What I do know about that is that when I learned about it, which was late morning on Sunday, a number of people had posted about it on social media. And I went down to the church and along with people in the church and some folks from, I'm presuming probably from the neighborhood, spent an hour or so cleaning off the graffiti, the worst of it, which was on the back of the building. And I think there's good news. The only good news is that there were people from the community who were outraged, at least as far as I can tell. Not just that, but there were people who came and helped. And when I got there, which was about noon, the police were there and talking to folks from the church, the priest, and but we can't let this kind of stuff happen in our community. And I think that I wouldn't say that that the way the police have handled it is at all improper. I appreciate FBI's definition, but I am certain that the police are bringing the power of the criminal law against and will in their investigation and in trying to bring the people who did this to justice. But we can't, just as we couldn't a few years ago, let swastikas that were painted on LMS stand. We couldn't have spray painting of electrical boxes with anti-Semitic slogans. These things we're not going to tolerate because we don't have that crap in our town. We're not going to allow it to continue. And so I think, and my bet is that there's not a council member here and there's not a member of the city staff that has anything less than outrage over what happened. So I appreciate Mr. Donner's coming forward, and I know a lot of others have done that. And in due course, the police chief, I'm sure, will have something to say about this. But anyway, know that we all care very deeply about the community and the terror that happens every time bias crime happens. And so thanks a lot. That's all I have.
Thanks, Councilmember Lay, and thanks to all the members of the community who have written in about the topic. And just a reminder, throughout the past year, there have been lots of protests and things that people have been very upset and angry about, and consistently the council and staff have reiterated that lawlessness is not the way to voice your concern over these different issues. And we've seen really good work by members of the community doing peaceful protests. And that's the kind of thing that we want to see from people, and using their speech for good, and getting community members together for discussion, artwork, things like that. And so just any type of vandalism or thuggery or mob behavior like this is just not appropriate. But we don't want to discourage the positive types of things that we've seen in the last year either. So people should come forward if they've committed these crimes and report yourself to the police, so that justice can be served in this case. Any other council comments? All right, that takes us to the Councilmember Fahey with a slow hand.
Sorry that I was slow. I would just want to reiterate what every other council person has said, and also what Mr. Donner said. This was absolutely a hate crime that we just cannot accept or condone in any way. The sentiments behind it, the action behind it, any kind of acceptance of it it was just an appalling thing to happen in our community. And I just can't say enough negative things about what was done.
Thank you. Any other council comments? City manager's report.
Thank you, City Council, for the comments on that. And I would just comment that our police department is obviously taking this very seriously, and also talking with the district attorney. And so this is a matter that we're very focused on. And I also just wanted to comment on something that came up earlier before we started the meeting, and would like to thank the community for their participation in the Labor Day events this weekend. This was really one of the first events that the city's been able to host since the pandemic, and so we were happy to see the community come out for an event, a COVID cautious event that allowed people to be outdoors and be together to celebrate Labor Day. So thank you to council for your participation, and also want to thank staff who put a lot of time into shifting the focus of the event to a new location and kind of a new format to accommodate some of the pandemic response measures that we have in place. Thanks very much.
Thank you, City Manager Davis. And that takes us to our regular business. Our first item tonight is our Boulder County Public Health update on COVID-19 and our new public health order. And so we're very lucky to be joined by Public Health tonight. Thank you so much for making time for us. And I'm going to actually turn it back over to our City Manager, Megan Davis, to just introduce the topic.
Thank you. So there's a lot of COVID activity going on right now. We have a new public health order, and so special thanks to Boulder County Public Health team for being here tonight. They're going to share a little bit about some of the recent data trends and their response with the public health order, and answer any questions that council has. I will go ahead and Lexi and Camille, I can share my screen, and then you can just let me know when you need to advance the presentation. All right, I'm going to turn it over. Hang on a second. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Boulder County Public Health.
Thank you, Interim City Manager Davis. This is Camille Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director of Boulder County Public Health. Actually, today is my 3-month anniversary, so I'm new to the community and to this position, taking it following the retirement of the previous Executive Director. So thank you to Mayor Stolzman and to the entire City Council on behalf of Boulder County Public Health. Thank you for having us here this evening. We're definitely poised to provide you with some of the most up-to-date data that we have relative to COVID-19. That would include, but not limited to, the case counts in our community as well as vaccination rates. But Dr. Lexi Nolan, who is our Deputy Director of Boulder County Public Health, will lead almost the entirety of this presentation. We're intending to show you how our strategies work to prevent severe illness and death. They also work to not overwhelm the systems, the hospital system, the public health system. and also provide us with some community strategies to safely return to what we recall as normal activities prior to the pandemic. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Nolan so that she can provide you with this update. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council, and to our Louisville public who may be tuning in. Thank you for having us this evening. The timing is excellent. As Director Rodriguez mentioned, we did just pass a new public health order. Tina Ruland will be joining us at the end of my presentation to talk a little bit about what exactly is in the order. But we also felt like it was an opportune moment to take a pause, since we haven't been with you for a while, and talk a little bit about what's happening in relation to the Delta variant and how we at Public Health are working hard to try to move from a reactive position and strategy to really thinking long-term about how we begin to manage and take control over this pandemic so it doesn't have control over us. Next slide, please. So I'll talk quickly first about cases in Boulder County. Next slide. This week we are seeing about 147 cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days, which puts us in the CDC tracker's range of high transmission. We have been in either substantial or high transmission for a couple of months now. At those levels, the CDC determines that the virus is kind of getting away from you, and there need to be new mitigation strategies added to any county's approach. This ongoing sustained positioning in substantial or high transmission with the CDC's recommendations for universal indoor masking when you're in those levels is what led to our public health order this week. But we'd like to give you a little bit of additional context so that you understand not only kind of what triggered this public health order, but what we're seeing and how we understand our positioning in Boulder County in relation to our neighbors. Next slide. So this is the CDC tracker applied to all of the counties in Colorado, and I think you can see our case rates for each of our nearby counties. Some of them are very concerning in the 300 range, including counties that are directly next to Boulder County. And we all know that our county lines are not a fence. Our folks pass back and forth across county lines every day for work and play and all of the things that they need to do in their lives. And importantly, our hospital systems serve the region and even folks beyond Colorado and other states. And so when we're thinking carefully about how do we protect our health system, how do we protect our folks, it's not just a matter of what's happening in Boulder County. It really is important to pay attention to what's happening around us. Next slide. So we're now at 77.1 cases per day that we're seeing typically roll into our database. Of note, the capacity for our epidemiology team for full case investigations and contact tracing is limited at around 50 per day. So we have been in surge protocols for our epi team since early August. We have called in some additional supports, but we are still in surge protocols. What that means is that contact tracing is not as full interviews as it is when we are in a regular response. We do abbreviated investigations, and this is really to help us focus on potential for outbreaks and vulnerable populations in particular. We want to make sure that we are shifting our resources to have the biggest impact on the most vulnerable folks. Next slide. So you'll notice that all this is case trends among various age groups since the beginning of June. When we really, were hoping that we were out of the woods before Delta really made itself known in Colorado fully. And what you can see is that all age groups are up in terms of cases since late July, and we have some very significant spikes in most age groups in the last week. And so for, we have lots of armchair prognosticators about how things will settle down. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing right now. We are seeing cases continuing to climb. Next slide. This is just for a little comparison, a little context. This is the black line represents where we were in terms of cases at this time last year. And the orange line represents where we are this year. And that's particularly concerning because we are about to go into fall when we would expect to see an increase in cases due to folks being inside more, due to kids being back in school. That was part of the motivation around why we felt a school public health order and a universal indoor masking order was really needed, was because we are going in the wrong direction well before when we would expect to see cases rise additionally. Next slide. So this graph is a little bit of a focus on our younger folks, and the dotted lines represent where we are this year, and the solid lines represent where we were last year at this time. I just want to make a note that that solid orange line that you're looking at that goes really spiky is 12 to 19-year-olds. And at this time last year, we were just going into the CU surge. And so that information, that spike that you're seeing is significantly relevant to that CU surge that we had last year. So we need to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, and we are working to separate this data so that we can see more specifically where we are with our high school kids specifically without the confounding data of the CU surge. And we hope to have that ready next week. But even without that CU surge, if you kind of look back just a few days, you see that that age group of 12 to 19 is approximately 3 times where we were last year before the CU surge. The 0 to 5 population is about 10 times where we were last year at this time. And our 6 to 11-year-old population is way off the charts, namely because they were almost down at 0 last year, and now they're extremely high. They are our highest group. This is why we are concerned about children. Next slide, please. So this is some of our race ethnicity data that everyone knows that we've been tracking since the beginning of the pandemic. In recent weeks, we had been able to kind of maintain a fairly equitable level. We're seeing a little bit of a bump the last couple of weeks, a little bit of disproportionate impact on our Hispanic and Latinx population. And you'll see that that's related to the next slide, please. We are also seeing a shift in the geographic spread. Usually Boulder and Longmont are pretty evenly divided. We are seeing more cases in Longmont, proportionally more cases. Our cases in Lafayette, Louisville, and Superior are remaining about the same over the last few weeks proportionally, but not in terms of absolute numbers. Okay, so let's look at a little bit of hospitalization data. We have become a little bit more concerned about this, partly because the state of Colorado has been predicting that hospitalizations will peak in Colorado in December. And the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation estimates that another 100,000 people will die in the United States between now and December 1st, which is very concerning. What you see in front of you is hospitalizations in the past week, and the dark red line is Boulder County, and the pink line is the Denver metro counties consolidated altogether. So you see we follow a very similar pattern. And what's most important to recognize is that it doesn't matter a lot what's happening in Boulder County because our hospitals are a system. They all work together. They respond to patients not only beyond Boulder County, but beyond the state of Colorado at times, and they respond to issues beyond COVID. Next slide. So a little bit of data that's based on the North Central region, which makes sense as a data strategy to gather it regionally instead of for specific hospitals. This is kind of a coding of where hospitals are. We're a little concerned that there are some metrics that maybe aren't captured. This is based on an analysis that the state provides to us, but we're concerned there are some metrics that may not be capturing the full urgency of the situation. Our hospitalizations are currently in yellow. They are up 14% from in the past week. Our ICU capacity dropped 17% in the last week. We're fine with ventilators. On staffing, most hospitals have very tight staffing. Our PEDS hospitalizations are in yellow. We have limited vaccination policies, and we have now moved into the combined hospital transfer center plan activated at level 1 on August 17th, which means that our hospitals are now actively working to transfer and balance patients because they are stressed. Next slide. So we do continue to see occasional deaths. Our deaths, as you can see, are significantly down from pre-vaccination levels, but we are continuing to see occasional deaths.
Lexi,
Yes.
you guys have done just such a good job of explaining all these charts to us over time that the questions that we have might get more and more esoteric as this continues on. But I've got one question from a resident on this deaths chart. If someone gets, let's say they get airlifted from Texas, the hospital capacity, or in another state, just some other state that the hospital capacity doesn't have space, and they get brought to one of the Boulder County hospitals, and then they happen to pass away tragically, does the death count in our county, or does the death count in the county where they were brought from?
My understanding is that the death is the place of residence, that it would not count as our death. These are deaths of Boulder County residents.
Thank you.
I'm glad I could answer that question. Okay, next slide.
Sorry,
Testing.
Lexi, if you don't mind, would that mean that potentially this is a Boulder County resident that died when they were in Texas?
It could, yes.
That's interesting. Okay.
All right, next slide. We'll move on to testing. So this is our 7-day positivity. We are maintaining, we've dropped testing a little bit, but it's kind of starting to creep back up. We're starting to get more numbers, which is good. Our positivity rate is at 4.3%. Just as a reminder, we want people to be testing because the more people getting tested, the more confidence we can have that the case rate that we're seeing is accurate. If people don't get tested, we can't know that the case rate is accurate. So we are seeing more tests in the last week as people are recognizing that there's concern as they are getting sick. And we are working hard to make sure that our testing sites stay open and accessible to folks. Next slide. Let's move on to vaccinations. Next slide. Okay, so we are now at 76.4% of our eligible population has received at least has received a full course of vaccinations, and 67.7% of our total population. So this total population is a number we haven't been previously reporting as much. When you're looking at risk, when you're looking at efforts to increase vaccination rates, looking at the eligible population is really useful. But when you really want to take a look at community risk and help people understand their risk in circulating, being around, wearing masks, et cetera, it's helpful to understand what the vaccination rate is among the total population, because that is the number that we're going to be looking for as we seek to achieve community immunity, which we think with the Delta variant at this point is closer to 90% than the 75% or so that we had previously estimated with the original wild strain. So that 67.7 number is important. A large proportion of those are kids under 11. So we are anxiously awaiting the emergency use authorization for that age group, as well as continuing to work to vaccinate folks in other age groups. Next slide. So from this is the vaccine doses administered per day. It has bumped up a bit in recent weeks. We think that part of that is an effect of the full licensure of the Pfizer vaccination by the FDA that is encouraging some folks who may have been hesitant. But we also think that some of it may be driven by increasing adoption of vaccination policies by employers, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. Next slide. And this is just a breakdown of where you see different vaccination rates among different age groups. And of course, we're happy to circulate all of these slides following the City Council meeting if folks want to take a closer look at these. Next slide. One more. So if we look at where Boulder is compared to the rest of the metro area, we're doing very well. You can see that slight bump a couple of weeks ago in relation to the FDA announcement. Next. And this is our map of Boulder County. We're looking pretty good in terms of distribution. We still have some mountain communities that need a little bit of that extra support to get vaccinated. Next slide. Here's a list of resources. I'm not going to read them to folks, but this is, may be useful for folks after the presentation. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit now is kind of, okay, so we have all of this data, we see where we're going, we've seen some of the recent trends, what do we do with this? And what we're really trying to do at Boulder County Public Health is, as I mentioned earlier, move from kind of a reactionary positioning to really being proactive in anticipating what the needs are and really identifying goals that speak to everyone's needs so that we're not prioritizing COVID needs over really critical needs that different populations have. So when we think about our North Star goals, we've kind of been testing these goals with folks to see if they resonate with people. But first of all, we want to prevent severe illness and deaths. Second, we want to not overwhelm the health system. And third, we want to return to safely return to normal activities. That means keeping kids in school. It means keeping businesses open. It means that all of those things that we do as a community that bind us together, we still get to do. And it's important when we think about those three goals and how they work together to think carefully about what are the strategies that we can use. Before we go to the next slide, I do just want to make a quick comment. We mentioned deaths and hospitalizations, the peak in December. A little bit concerned about that, particularly concerned with the overwhelm of the health system in relation to the fact that hospitalizations are expected to peak in December. That's not good. We have a ways to go before they're going to be out of the woods. We are also getting new science that suggests that between 15 and 30% of kids that are exposed to COVID have some kind of longer lasting effect. In relation to that third component of safely returning to normal activities, just to take us kind of into the next slide, what we want is we want to have a combination of what we think of as sustainable and habitual mitigation strategies that really are embedded in each of our psyches. And when we go out the door in the morning, we kind of know what we need to do, if we need to take our mask with us, if we need to be thinking about social distancing, if whatever. Those things are just kind of built in and sustainable. We need to be encouraging folks to get vaccinated and have systems and policies in place that support that. And then recognize that every once in a while, if we start to get off track, the public health department's job is to help step in and say, hey, we are getting off track. Let's do a course correction. Let's do something together, whether it's a public health order or another kind of interruption to move us back into a positive space. Next slide. So one thing we really recognize is that there's no one particular mitigation strategy that's 100% effective all the time. They are useful in different contexts and different situations, and also very useful in combination, because sometimes one mitigation strategy may not do it, but two or three in combination will. And these mitigation strategies range from personal responsibilities, which are those kind of habits, sustainable, habitual kind of practices, all the way to shared responsibilities and systems and policies that support them. Next slide. We also recognize that the mitigation strategies, some of them are much less burdensome than others. So if we look at kind of that left end where we see essential and less burdensome strategies, those are the things that we really want people to internalize and think, make habitual, make part of their daily experience. This pandemic is unfortunately not going to go away anytime soon. And so this does need to become a habit for us to do these things, to open the window if there are too many people in the room, to keep washing our hands, to do all of those things. And what we want to do is really stay at those less burdensome strategies on the left so that we don't have to go back to community lockdown, business closure, remote work and learning. And I just want to make a point that even though Boulder County Public Health did just pass a public health order requiring universal indoor masking, our intention is not to communicate to the community that therefore people should stay home. Quite the opposite. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create the mitigation layers and ask people to honor them and abide by them so that we can keep going to work, so that we can keep going to shops, so we can keep going to eat, doing all of those things that we like to do. Next slide. So one thing that's really important and that we'll talk about in a little while is in addition to the universal indoor public masking requirement, we built an opportunity into the public health order so that businesses who adopt, I'm sorry, I want to talk a little bit about something else first, and then I'll go to that one. This is just a little bit of information about where we're seeing employer vaccination policies in Boulder County. So all of these groups require that their staff, specifically, that their staff get vaccinated. And you'll notice down here, we have all of the health systems at the bottom. That's 3,800 agencies across Colorado. That's an enormous group. We also have some large employers in the private sector. We have a number of public sector employers, and we are beginning to hear more and more conversations with our regional counterparts and partners. Next slide. So the second part of this, which is kind of one step further than requiring your staff to be vaccinated, is COVID vaccine passports. And we've seen some citywide adoption of vaccine passports. But we have also seen voluntary vaccination passports at the venue or the business level. So what that means is that a business has said, we require our staff to be vaccinated, and we require anyone who comes through our doors or is working with us to be vaccinated. That's what we're calling a voluntary vaccination passport. They are typically really useful in high-risk settings where masks are difficult. So that includes restaurants, bars, gyms, entertainment. And we're beginning to see some technology platforms rolling out across the United States that can create connectivity. Now, what we did in the masking public health order is that we created an opportunity for businesses to not require everyone to be masked if they require everyone to be vaccinated, including patrons, including folks that walk in the door. So we had a rapid self-attestation process over the weekend after we rolled out the public health order, where we said, if you have this kind of policy in place, let's talk. And you don't need to necessarily have everyone masked when they come in your front doors. And we had 51 businesses in Boulder County respond to that rapid self-attestation. And that was without any significant publicity or information. And what that really told us is that there's actually a lot more happening in our community than we might have been aware of. And so we're going to be really focusing on how do we help and support that and grow that into, a broader community effort. How do we share lessons? How do we make sure people have the resources that they need to do that kind of work? Next slide. So just to let you know, these are some of the groups that we consulted with before we finished developing the public health order. It was informed by a large group of folks. Next slide. And really importantly, part of what we're doing with this public health order is we're standing up our partner liaison team that we had last year that works with businesses and other community groups. And we really want to reinvigorate this team to be able to work with a variety of different kinds of partners, not just businesses, but also the faith community, community organizations, public agencies, other kinds of partners. It's going to be a staff of about 4 to 5 people. We've got, I think, 3 to 4 people. Actually, we have 3 to 4 people now, and it'll be 4 to 5 in the end. So we're looking to hire 1 additional person. And it's really about making sure that folks have the information, not just for public health orders, but also for this voluntary vaccination passport program, that they know what is expected of them, that they are giving us feedback about what's working and what's not working, and that we're really supporting them to adopt vaccination policies that are appropriate for their staff and their needs, so that we can, just take the small bites to move all of us towards that community immunity level. Next slide. This is just a little bit of a layout of what that team is going to be doing over the immediate, medium, and longer terms. It's going to start really with these public health orders, but then we'll move quickly to these vaccination policies, making sure that they have legal support, but also making sure that employees have the resources that they need to be treated fairly in all of these interactions. We also want to make sure that we're working particularly with our business community to prep for winter by creating safe indoor spaces. And that's particularly relevant for restaurants and bars. In the longer term, we really want to see this as an opportunity for the business community and other partners to really lead community solutions in the pandemic and to drive the conversation and the ideas that are coming out, and to really be a sounding board for public health so that we kind of know what pathways are more effective. Last slide. So just this is a little bit of information about some of the things that we're looking at doing, really doing a regional alignment with our Metro Denver partners so that we have shared resources, approaches, and information. Really want to support a level playing field so we don't have counties playing against each other, and create some confidence to learn and adjust together. As I mentioned, toolkits and resources that we're looking at putting together now, and making sure that this team is connected tightly with our call center and our containment teams so that we have the information flowing between those teams that needs to flow out. And I'm happy to take questions on this, or I'm happy to turn it over to Trina Ruland to describe exactly what's in our public health order.
We'll just pause here for just a moment because it looks like there's a couple of questions to this point. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to talk before we move on to the masking order. First of all, I really appreciate the work that the Boulder County Public Health has done on the masking orders. I think those are particularly important. I know that members of this council have said that it's been difficult for us over the last year and a half, because we are not a public health body, and yet we have been required and asked to step up as public health experts. And I think it's really important that the Department of, or the County Public Health continue to serve that function. I want to, part of me is thinking, like, what took you so long on the masking order? Because, I would certainly like to see us be a little bit more proactive when it comes to masking orders, so that we don't get to a point where we are have significant spikes like we're seeing today. I think it's also important for us not to follow and to lead. And what I've seen often is following. Denver and other communities have led, and we have waited, and it concerns me that we would wait for our community on some of these issues. I think vaccinations in particular I want to touch on because I'm struggling with how we can really promote and encourage vaccinations in our community. It's one of the best defenses that we have against especially serious disease here. And what I heard, Lexi, from you was that, lots of businesses are doing this. We want to support them. We want to encourage them. But I didn't hear a lot of, we need to make sure that we're, recommending mandates or even requiring businesses to make sure that their employees are requiring vaccinations. In other communities, you can't go out to a bar or a restaurant without having been vaccinated and showing your vaccine passport at the door. Whether that's the right solution for us is another matter, but it is the idea, of we have this great tool and making sure that people are using it in order to continue to exist in the community and interact is particularly important to me. The father of children whose age group is seeing the most significant spikes and who are back in school. So I would just encourage you to continue to be proactive and not and make sure that we're using science to be forward thinking and leading as opposed to sort of bowing to political pressure. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Brown. Dr. Nolan, did you want to respond on either the vaccinations or the masks?
Sure. And let me just say, first of all, I deeply appreciate your comments, Councilman Brown. Why did we wait? Why are we following? Actually, we didn't wait. We were the first county in Colorado to require a school masking mandate, and we are the second county in Colorado after San Juan County to require a public indoor masking mandate. So I would push back a little bit on that one, but I definitely take your point that it feels like, we went into June and we were happy and we were looking forward to summer and our case rates were low, and then they started creeping up, and maybe a concern that maybe we didn't move fast enough. And I will say that, there was a lot of tension about watching the data and recognizing some patterns that we had seen overseas about spikes that then precipitously fell and not wanting to get too far ahead. And then we really had a big focus on making sure that our kiddos were safe in school, which did take a little time to get that order in place. So we really have moved as quickly as we felt like we could. Also recognizing that this is a little bit of a complex public health order, not in the masking part, but really in trying to cogitate about what is this longer term plan that we have envisioned that's going to keep us from being in that reactionary mode to really being strategic and proactive and getting into that protective modality that you talked about, and building in that voluntary vaccination program. Probably took us an extra week or two to get that one right. I will say that the public health order too, the way that we have designed it, and Director Rodriguez may want to speak a little more to this, but the way that we've designed it is that the public health order itself stays in effect, and the masking requirement is in effect or suspended even while the public health order is in effect, as long as we're in substantial or high transmission in that CDC tracker. So trying to get away from, we've got a public health order, there's no public health order, to really more of an approach where we're asking the community to pay attention to the numbers, and we're helping to communicate that out to know what they're supposed to do on any particular day. So it's less herky-jerky and more trying to create habits and intentionality that's really embedded in the community. So I hope that was helpful a little bit, but I definitely take your point about Boulder County needing to lead, because what we saw with the school mask mandate is that as soon as Boulder County was able to get the public health order in effect, we saw a number of other counties kind of move much more quickly into that space, and we suspect that might happen with this universal indoor masking requirement too. Trina, would you like to say something a little bit about kind of whether we have the jurisdiction to require vaccination mandates?
Yes, I can. And the way I'll answer that, Lexi, is this way. Denver is just completely different legal entity than Boulder County Public Health. Denver is a city and county. So when they put in their vaccine mandate, it applied everywhere in Denver, whereas Boulder County, there's the county plus all the municipalities, plus all of the different jurisdictions. So it's just a much more complex analysis and a much more complex situation. It's not just head down, it's multiple heads. So I would just push back a little bit on that and say that Denver is just very differently situated with respect to that. And I'll talk more about how we put vaccines in our order once we get there.
So
And
let me just respond a little bit to that, which is and I really appreciate everything that you're saying. Using legal structures as a reason not to do something is exactly the wrong thing. What I'm seeing is that throughout this pandemic, it's often been well, it's not our job, that's the state's job. Well, it's not our job, that's the local government's job. And that's what people do when they're passing the buck and they're not wanting to take political hits and blame. So, if it requires a different legal structure, then let's get together, let's work through the consortium of cities or some other structure and do what we need to do to protect our citizens. And I think this council would step up and do that.
Appreciate that support very much. I will say that the tack that we're absolutely pursuing right now is really trying to create coalitions that will provide what we think of as a longer term sustainable approach to vaccinations. When you have businesses that are requiring vaccinations of employees and folks that walk in the front door, we see that as a longer term approach, a longer term solution, because when you have staff turnover, when the months go by and the public health order requiring vaccination has gone away, you still can have requirements for boosters and maintenance that a public health order simply can't reach. But I absolutely hear your enthusiasm in Louisville for something that might look more like a legal coalition approach. And I think that might be worth talking more about. Thank you.
Councilmember Lay?
Yeah, I may look at it slightly differently. I share Councilman Brown's concern, and I don't have young children, but I know plenty of families who do or have kids at risk or family members at risk, even though they're vaccinated and all that kind of stuff. And I have maybe a little bit twisted sense of whether the glass is half full or empty, because I'm originally from Sterling, and I just checked while I was looking through this. I was comparing the rates, and it's like Logan County is at 29.5% vaccinated. And my dad tells me that, it's much higher for older people, which is good, but I think we're doing some things right. We have a different political geography here, and that helps. But not just that. There's a whole bunch of things that you guys are doing, and I appreciate it. And I love these charts. Yeah, we're going to get these charts. We're going to squeeze them out of you, because I want people to see them. There's some really good stuff here that I think really will grab people in maybe a different way than a graph or whatever. Alone will. And I appreciate that approach too, because everybody learns this stuff in a different way. Everybody is just saturated after a year and a half of looking at this stuff, that anything you can do to make it, to enliven it, so to speak, all good. I'm really interested in what you were saying about the voluntary efforts of some of the businesses and the kind of surprise that maybe you had at seeing how many of them went through this voluntary attestation without really an awful lot of pushing. And that's, sometimes you just sort of I understand you throw out some of the bait and see whether anything bites. But I think those kinds of efforts are ones that I strongly, strongly encourage. And I realize that you're trying to create this ongoing, sustainable enterprise, but I don't know what's being done specifically to reach out to businesses. And Councilman Brown is right. We're really, we want to leave you all to do the health work. We're municipal officials. We're pretty motivated. We have a lot of people asking us a lot of questions, and the more we can deliver, the better. But if we can do anything to encourage the dissemination of some of these things, we've got an economic vitality commission, which Councilor Dickinson heads here. And, to the extent we can help encourage people by just putting things on agendas and talking about them and our website and whatever. I hope that you are working with our staff to try to do everything you can and using the networks that we have, because it sounds like some things are really taking. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of leadership to show, but there's some good things, and we need to keep momentum going, especially where people are looking like they want to participate.
Thanks, Councilmember Lay. So it's just as a process check, it's 6:56 and we have a lot to get through. So I'm just going to take a pause on questions here, but we'll come back for final questions at the end after we hear from Trina on the actual content of the rule. So Councilmember Dickinson, I see you and you'll be the first one up, but just think about that because it's 6:56. So we need to be concise with our thoughts. Trina, take it away.
Thank you. My name is Trina Ruland. I'm the attorney for Boulder County Public Health. I'm going to talk just briefly about the 2 mask orders that we have in place. As Dr. Nolan mentioned, we were the first public health jurisdiction in the state to issue a school mask order. All of our metro area partners followed within a week or 2 after that, issuing school mask orders in their jurisdictions respectively. We are the second county in Colorado to issue a universal mask order, following only San Juan, which I believe is a pretty small county. I want to say 8,000 people. So just to give the council a little bit of perspective on why we did this as 2 separate orders, they're really to meet 2 separate needs. The school mask order is focused on schools, childcare, and youth activities. I put sport there because a lot of youth activities are sports. It's age 2 and up. Boulder County Public Health is monitoring our schools data at least monthly. Our first report out will be to the Board of Health next week. The goal here is to keep in-person learning in schools because we know that that is what is best for children under the age of 18. The school mask order is based on the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation, the Colorado chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the CDC recommendations for K through 12 and childcare. And I put the link to the FAQs for the school mask order. By contrast, the public health order that we just issued on September 2nd, that the Board of Health approved, is for indoor public spaces. I want to emphasize that our order is meant to implement CDC recommendations that all individuals 2+ wear a face covering while in an indoor public space during periods of high or substantial transmission. So in contrast to the school order, which will remain in place as we monitor our local data, the indoor universal mask order might go away on its own if we drop into moderate or low transmission. And before I say a little bit more about that, I just kind of comparing and contrasting a little bit more. The indoor public spaces mask order is really focused on keeping businesses operating and open and resuming normal life and allowing us all to go about our activities in the way we have been going about them over this nice little pause in the summer. One thing I'll also say is this CDC recommendation for indoor universal masking came out July 27th, and Boulder County Public Health went into high transmission in early to mid-August. So this is a relatively recent development that is due to the Delta variant, very closely tracked there. Next slide. As I mentioned, the universal indoor masking order is based on the CDC tracker. So we got rid of the dial, that's gone now, old news. With Delta variant, we're looking at the CDC tracker. When we are in the orange or the red, substantial or high transmission, masks are going to be required, but we're going to monitor that. And if we are able as a community to bring our transmission down to low or moderate for 21 days, then the mask order will automatically release the masking requirement. The mask order will remain in place and will go into effect again if we have 5 days in substantial or high. And we actually mapped our data historically using these metrics, and it tracks pretty well with when we had our mask mandates. So we're pretty confident that this is a good metric to follow. Next slide. Just to lay it all out there, universal indoor masking means masks are required in all indoor public spaces. There's been a little confusion about that. Indoor public space means anywhere that's not your residence. So that could be a private office space, that could be a public facing space, that could be a manufacturing floor. It's really pretty all encompassing. If it's not in your residence, it's a pretty safe bet. It's a public indoor space. It's age 2 and older, which is in line with CDC guidance. This is different from what we had last winter. It is regardless of vaccination status. And I'll get into that a little bit more with this vaccine passport program, but the default is masks must be worn regardless of vaccination status unless you have an explicit approval from Boulder County Public Health. And once again, it's during the periods of high and substantial transmission. Next slide. There's a continuation of the exceptions that we saw last year, and I won't get into these except to just point out, if you're alone in a room, you don't have to wear a mask. All of the rest of these are should feel pretty common sense. They're designed to help normal life continue on and just give you an exception if you are performing or engaged in an activity where you can't otherwise do it with a mask, such as swimming. And then we added this new exception, this vaccine passport facility, which is what I'm going to spend a little time talking about. Next slide. So this new concept, this approved vaccine passport facility, is very similar to what we're seeing in San Francisco and New York, where you have to show proof of vaccination to enter a restaurant or a bar or whatever it is. The difference between what we're doing in Boulder County and what we see in New York and San Francisco and in some places in Denver is this is a voluntary program. We're not requiring any single business to do this. It's an opt-in. So in order to opt in, a business must come up with their mandatory vaccination policy, which means they have to come up with a way to verify proof of vaccination. I'm holding my hand like this because it's usually on your phone. You walk in the door and they say, "May I see your vaccine card?" Yes, here it is on my phone. And you have to show that for every single person walking in the door. And we're leaving it up to the businesses to determine how this works for them. Some businesses may be subject to certain federal laws where they have to provide accommodations for certain individuals with disabilities. And so therefore we are not dictating how any business should implement this particular program, but making sure it meets a certain threshold. This is also meant to be flexible. It can apply to governments, offices. If I'm a gym and I want to just have a fully vaxxed class and the rest of the time require masks, I can do that. I just require proof of vaccination for my fully vaxxed class at 5:30 a.m. and the rest of the day, everyone can just come in wearing their masks. It can apply to a single building, a restaurant. It can be a one-time event. If you want to have a fully vaxxed wedding, you can absolutely do that and apply for this exception. Next slide. Just emphasizing a few things. It's a voluntary program. You do have to track it. You can't just say, we're just going to ask everyone coming in. There has to be a little bit of tracking. You do have to have a policy. As Dr. Nolan mentioned, we want to encourage this type of systemic change where we are having businesses implement their own policies that are going to outlast orders and that they're going to be designed for them with their needs, their community, and their demographics in mind. And just a reminder, it doesn't just apply to employees, it's guests, patrons, members, whoever's walking in your building. Next slide. I already touched upon some of this, and I guess the only point I'll emphasize from this side is that it is an application process. You can't just say, I'm looking at vaccines when people are walking in the door and call it good. Not good enough. You have to have approval from Boulder County Public Health. The other thing I'll mention is this is not a vax or mask policy. That's not going to cut it. You need to require proof of vaccination for everyone. You can't just say, oh, you're not going to give me proof. That's fine. Just put on a mask. That's not meeting the intent of the program. The intent is to really get near universal vaccination within your facility. Next slide. We do not yet have the application process fully up and running. That'll happen later this month. As Dr. Nolan mentioned, we did offer a temporary approval for businesses that are already doing this because we want to honor that and we want to promote that. And that's the 51 businesses that have already submitted. But it's not a submit now or you lose it forever. The full program will be up and running later this month, and all of those businesses that have obtained temporary approval will be required as a condition of their temporary approval to go through the full approval process to make sure that their policies are meeting the requirements of this order. Next slide. That might be the end.
Thank you
All right,
so much. Thank you so much for that. This is really great to get to have you all here tonight and to provide this update. And like we've said many times, we really can't thank you enough for all of the things that public health has been doing in the last year and what a tremendous effort it's been. And so we have time for a few council questions. Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all to the work you're doing. I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. I hope you hear the frustration in my voice, and I hope that you're frustrated along with me because I'm not frustrated with you. You know, the community around us, the state, the country around us is very frustrating to me that Boulder County is doing what we're doing with vaccinations. If you look at that Swiss cheese image you guys showed, you know, we're doing the hard work and our vaccination rates are incredibly high. And putting masks on Louisvillians when we're not putting masks on people who live in Ward and Larimer County and all those other places is it's akin to having all the healthy people stay home and all the sick people walk around town. It just I will wear a mask. I wear a mask all day today, and I'm definitely following the rules. I'm not an anti-masker in any sort of way. I just really want you guys to be pushing the state and to be working on those coalitions that you're talking about because again, if I require the 85% of my employees that are vaccinated to wear masks and the 15% that refuse to get vaccinated also refuse to wear masks, what am I really accomplishing with my mask policy? And so I don't mind anything you're doing for Boulder County. I think it's great work and I'm all in. I just know that if we're not doing it in every county, we're not really pushing the needle very far. And I know you must be frustrated because you can only affect your county. But I really hope that we can push the governor and push the state to act as one. I mean, geez, the country could you imagine? But to act as one, because that's the only way we're going to have any effect on this. It's very frustrating for those of us who are doing every single layer of the Swiss cheese to add another layer. Just add another layer onto every other thing I'm doing. And the real impact is going to happen when we make other people do the most important things. So thank you so much for your work. And I'm a happy participant, but I hope we can do more regionally. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Dickinson. And so on that note, if public health does draft up a letter to the state or needs additional signatures on that, our council would be willing to support you all in that. If there's a collective letter or if you need us to send an additional letter of our own, just let us know. Councilmember Brown.
Thanks, Mayor. I appreciate it. Couple more comments from me. I just wanted to highlight for our friends at Boulder County Public Health. You may already be aware of this, but Louisville has really been a leader, I think, in the masking department. From the very beginning of the pandemic, our mask order required people 2 and older to wear masks in indoor settings, and I noticed the county's order up until this spring only required folks 10 and older. I'm very appreciative that the county's order has caught up with the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations and the CDC's recommendations on that. I also want to say that, you know, Louisville has required over the summer, we required our children's activities, especially our summer camp at the rec center, all the children indoors to wear masks. whereas the rest of the county was not doing that. So I think I'm really thankful for the work of this council, and I would encourage you all to continue to use us as a resource and a partner in your campaigns and for vaccinations or for in that regard. I have one more question, which is, you mentioned about the testing and the importance of testing in helping to make sure that people isolate and stay home when they're sick. I know that up until recently, at least, the Boulder County Public Health website indicated that many of the testing facilities and sites in the county would close. One of which is the Stasio Field site, which isn't too far here from parts of Louisville. Can you talk a little bit more about the county's plans for testing sites and whether some of those might remain open given the status of the Delta variant?
Absolutely, and I very much appreciate that question. Let me just say first, Councilmember Brown, that we have deeply appreciated Louisville's leadership in the mitigation work that you have done, and it has, in many ways, just as Boulder County, has made a path for other counties. Louisville has also helped by creating that space for the county to be able to move in that direction. So appreciate that. In relation to testing, we are very glad to report that there is no longer any plan to close Stasio anytime soon. It will remain open. We are also looking at potentially relocating the Longmont testing site back to the fairgrounds or to another appropriate venue. The space where it is now is getting a little bit tight, and we may be wearing out our welcome, and want to make sure that we are completely accessible to as many folks that need to reach us as possible. So we are working on that plan right now. We do not have a fully fleshed plan yet, but we do absolutely consider it a top priority to ensure that everyone has access to testing, and not just access to testing, but effective access, meaning that it's welcoming to folks that have different needs, that it is free when need be, and all of those additional kind of components that make it a successful program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nolan. I really appreciate the work that you all have been doing. And again, don't take my my comments the wrong way. I appreciate your partnership, and I also appreciate particularly on the testing, the ability to continue to make that available. So that's welcome news. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Brown. And I just have one sort of question, open-ended question that may not have an answer just tonight, but hopefully soon will. We have the kiddos vaccinations hopefully coming soon for the folks under 12. I know we get a lot of questions from parents about when. Have we heard any updates on the timing of that? Because getting that extra group of people vaccinated in our area would really make our numbers quite strong. They're sort of the last holdouts are the people that aren't allowed to be vaccinated yet. So I wonder if there's anything that you can share with us about sort of planning. What I'm afraid of is that there'll be this mad rush to be vaccinated again, similar to what happened, when the vaccinations first were released for people by age category earlier. And I wonder if there's some way people can pre-register, or if there is something that can be a lessons learned from our previous experience to facilitate big vaccine clinic sites so people can all go on the same day, or if they'll be done at school. So maybe you already have thought all of this out, or maybe that's yet to come, but if you could sort of tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's a pretty complex question because there's a lot of layers to it. I will say that one of the biggest limitations in the spring about vaccinations was really getting providers up and running, making sure that they were trained, that they were ready to receive vaccine, that they knew what to do, that they had systems in place for people to be able to sign up. The beauty of where we are now is that infrastructure has been built and it is still in place. We continue to vaccinate folks every day. I will tell you that there's some sequencing that we're looking at very carefully in terms of how do we time some of these needs, particularly in terms of what public health's specific responsibilities are and what are the spaces where public health is really facilitating and making sure that all of our other coordinators, I think we have something like 35 providers in the county that provide vaccines, or we did at one point, it may be much more now. But really watching, first of all, we have to do some places are already providing that third dose for immunocompromised folks. So that's one group of folks. And then we're looking at, what is the booster rollout actually going to be? Because what we've heard is that people will be eligible to get a booster 8 months after their original vaccination, or maybe after 8 months after their second dose, I think. And so we need to time that. And there are going to be some populations in that community that we need, as Boulder County Public Health, that we need to be able to be responsive to very quickly. And then we have look at, what happens when that, it's probably going to be 5 to 11 population that is given emergency use authorization first. And we're hoping that by November, knock on wood, that's happening. But unfortunately, we don't control the FDA. So when we look at our past practice of when our 12 to 15-year-olds became eligible, most of that population really just went to their providers, their pediatrician, or their existing outlets. So a lot of pharmacies or their doctors or Boulder County, Boulder Community Health. Was a significant provider of vaccines. And we were able to really throughput that 12 to 15-year-old group within about a month and a half. And we have amazing uptake in that group. It's over 80% in the 12 to 15-year-olds. And so what we're trying to figure out right now is, does the 5 to 11-year-old population, is that most similar to that 12 to 15-year-old population in terms of how urgently parents want to get this and how quickly they're going to take their kids to get it, whether we need to stand up a new site. We are working with the schools to make sure that anybody who has trouble getting to a vaccination site has the opportunity. And what we're building out is really kind of plans for vaccination, for family vaccination events, so that as we're pulling in those 5 to 11-year-olds, we're also catching anybody else in the family that hasn't had a chance to be vaccinated. So just, kind of make no wrong door kind of approach. I'm happy to answer additional questions, but I know we're short on time.
Thank you so much. You guys, thank you. So now we'll go to the members of the public on this agenda item. If any members of the public have any questions about or comments about Boulder County Public Health update on COVID-19 and new public health orders, please raise your hand. And if you've dialed in by phone, you can dial *9 and we'll see a hand raised on your behalf. All right, seeing none, that takes us back over to us. And so we just can't thank you enough for coming tonight. You saw we had a lot of questions and comments, and just really want to thank you for all your time and all your efforts for COVID-19.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
So our next topic tonight is our Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport Roundtable update. And so I'll turn it over to Councilmember Lipton to kick this one off. Councilmember Lipton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As you are aware, staff has been providing City Council with quarterly written updates on the activities and progress of the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport Community Noise Roundtable, also known as CNR. Since the last update on June 1st, the Roundtable has continued to meet monthly, with the next scheduled meeting for next week. The attendance at the meetings have been strong and the members have been engaged, and there has been substantial public engagement and comments for the first half hour of each meeting. I would characterize the first half of this year's efforts as being mostly presentations and to learning by the participants. There have been some acknowledgement among the participants of the inconvenient fact that the communities south of the airport believe that they derive significant economic benefits from having the airport, and the participants north of the airport, including ourselves, believing that they incur most of the significant noise impacts. We have agreed to extend the CNR efforts for at least another year, with the extension of the IGA and continuing to provide budgetary support as we did in fiscal years 2020 through 2021. The CNR is also now involved in a review and commenting period for a strategic business plan, which the airport and Jefferson County is considering to help guide future expansion of the undeveloped airport land and perhaps redevelopment of existing uses. As part of that business plan, there has been a criteria proposed for looking at noise impacts of the various airport expansion opportunities in deciding what might be acceptable expanded uses and activities in the future. The strategic business plan will likely be finalized and adopted later this month or in October. The CNR will discuss the plan at next week's meeting and provide its recommendations to the airport staff and to the county commissioners as part of that meeting. Finally, one of the next significant tasks of the CNR that the CNR will engage in is the review and possible adoption of several of the key recommendations contained in the ABC Times2 consultant report, which Louisville and the town of Superior jointly commissioned in 2019. A key recommendation from that report called for continued implementation and updating of the noise abatement procedures to support voluntary compliance, including strategies to route aircraft away from residential areas. Aircraft noise over our city is one of the primary sources of citizen complaint and has certainly impacted peaceful enjoyment of our community and residential premises. As part of our quarterly update tonight, we will be receiving a presentation by Mike Burrick of visualizations of the aircraft traffic over our community. Michael lives in Louisville and is a retired engineer who previously worked in the supercomputing division of NCAR and also at the Space Weather Prediction Center at NOAA. Through his career, Mike has supported science and computational research projects, some including the creation of visualizations of scientific data. I thought it'd be useful for Mike to share some of his analysis with our city council and city residents in order to have everyone better understand the scope and complexity of the aircraft noise issues that we are presented with. I'm hoping that Mike will get a similar opportunity to present his visualizations at a future CNR meeting. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mike Burrick.
Good evening, Mike. And you should be able to turn your video on and screen share if you'd like to at this time.
All right, I'm in the process of doing that. How's that?
We can see your screen.
All right, great. And you can't see me, but I will fix that in one moment. Oops. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Jeff, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Council, for listening and letting me present some of the work that I've done. I hope you find it clarifying. So I'm going to jump right in. For the purpose of the presentation, the idea here is that I'm going to be talking a lot about data. I'm not going to be trying to interpret the data for you. I'm just going to try to give you the facts. And basically flight activity from RMMA and overflight impacts over the city of Louisville. And then I'd like to receive feedback and answer questions. So I'll keep moving here. So what's in this presentation? I'm focusing on visualizations from June 2021. Flights at RMMA, that's one slide. And then I'm going to have several slides and bar graphs and analyses of what the data is telling me about what's happening over Louisville. That would be individual days that the flights are coming in the month of June, individual hours of the day where the flights are happening. And we'll get into that. And then a couple more things, comparison of overpasses of Louisville and neighboring cities. One neighboring city, it should be singular, and RMMA traffic impacts compared to other Front Range airports. So let's dive in. So to begin with, I need to give you a little bit of background about what you're seeing so that you know what you're seeing. Can you see my cursor?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to just go down through these 4 points. So what is important to know here is that I call this first thing a selection area. For Louisville, it's this green box. And obviously it's not covering the political boundaries. It's a sampling area that is meant to be over most of the population of Louisville. You can see that a little bit of Davidson Mesa isn't covered over here, and a little bit of Lafayette is included here. But what I'm trying to do is look at north-south traffic. So there is some of Louisville here. So the reason for this type of approach is that when I compare to other cities, I'm going to use the same size area to get a fair comparison. You can move the box to the left or the right, you'll get a little bit different answer. But I think in general, you'll get a good sense of what's going on. Now, on slides that are coming up, we'll see counts of flights. And what that means is if, for instance, something starts at RMMA and traverses this box, that's one flight. That's easy, right? But if it comes back, I don't count it twice. But when I count overpasses, that's exactly what I do. So if a flight goes north, it flies around and then flies back south, that counts as 2 overpasses. And that really is the impact on Louisville. The number of flights is related, but each time a plane flies over Louisville, I think that's what most people are interested in. And then the last point here is traffic density. So if you look to the left here, this is one flight, and you can see that it's quite light and almost hard to see. And this is intentional because what I want to show in terms of density is how many flights fly over the exact same point on the map. And so to get to this black color, which is in the this part of the visualization, at least 16 flights have to fly over that particular point on the map. But it could be 100. But to get some contrast here, that's what this is showing you. I should point out that the selection area in this case is the RMMA airport area, and that would be this, and it's for 2 days in June. And with that, I'm going to dive in. I will ask you to kind of orient yourself here because the next maps are going to be very difficult to see what's going on in the background. Oh, one other thing. Down in this corner, I'm showing you, oops. I'm showing you the flight level. So I'm going from 5,000 feet, essentially ground level, to 10,000 feet. So I'm not looking at flights from DIA. I specifically filter those out. I'm really trying to focus here on flights from RMMA, so the lower level flights. A few of them may sneak in. Okay, moving on. So this is the month of June. And what I've tracked, so the selection area is the RMMA airport. So any aircraft that traverses this area will show up in this plot. Now that means that if there are flights coming from other places, they'll show up in this plot. Any traffic that is intersecting RMMA is going to show up in this plot. And I think, first of all, there's 11,364 flights that I've captured with this selection area. It is not going to be the same as the count that the airport people get to because they count differently. They count a takeoff and a landing as 2 different things, as 2 different flight ops. So my numbers are not going to match theirs for that sort of reason. I think the takeaway from this slide is that there's obviously a lot of traffic going north and not much traffic going in other directions, and we know that already, right? There's a landing pattern here. There's a takeoff pattern here, but the main takeoff pattern is actually going north. And also, I mean, I can't tell you which of these lines goes south also, but we'll take that apart in a minute. So moving on, this is now using Louisville as the place that I'm concentrating on. And you remember from the last slide, there were 11,000 flights. 4,414 of those flights, or just one moment, about 30 to 40% fly over Louisville. Now, what is this telling you? It's telling you that any flight, any line that you see here has flown over Louisville at least once. So when you see things that are outside the box, that usually means that they're coming south outside of the box. So one overpass going north, one overpass going south if they fly over Louisville twice, but if they only fly over Louisville once and they return over Lafayette, one overpass. Let me look at my notes here. Nope, that's all I wanted to cover there. So I'm going to move on. So there's one other thing here. The colors represent altitudes. And in this view, I'm showing all altitudes, and obviously it's quite a scrambled mess. But the altitudes that we chose to highlight are 5,000 to 6,500 feet, actually 6,600 feet, 6,600 feet to 7,500 feet, and 7,500 feet to 10,000 feet. Why do we choose that? 6,600 feet is 1,000 feet above the highest ground in Louisville. And we'll go into that in a couple of slides. So this is the criteria that's set forth by the FAA for overflights. I'm going to dig into that in the next slide. So now this slide is showing you flights from 5,000 to 6,600 feet. Of the 4,000 flights that flew 4,044 and 14 flights over Louisville, half of them are in this range. There was 5,000, let's go back for a moment. There were 5,043 overpasses. Half of those overpasses are under 1,000 feet from the highest point in Louisville. Okay. And I'm not going to comment on legalities here. I'm just saying that we're not following the guidelines that are set out in the ABC ×2 report. I've copied here the FAA guidance on this, and I've also provided a couple of links. But a couple of things I want to point out here. The highest point in Louisville that I can find is 6,700 feet. And that's the cell tower that's near the Louisville Reservoir on Davidson Mesa. So that is actually noted by the FAA as a high point in Louisville. So that's a benchmark. Now, the FAA regulations say that you have to stay at least 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a radius of 2,000 feet. What does that mean on this map? 2,000 feet is approximately is approximately a circle. I'm so sorry. Push just a little harder and I get the pop-up. About like this. So any flights in this area should be at least 7,600 feet. Going to the east, Davidson Mesa does continue a little bit here. So I chose 6,600 feet to be a little bit conservative. But anyway, half of the flights are below the 1,000-foot threshold. I'd like to point out this word necessary because we keep hearing from the airport that when they're taking off or landing, they're allowed to be below 1,000 feet. I think that will be the retort that we get. And I want to talk about this word necessary. We need to dig into what necessary means. And I haven't found a definition of it, but I don't believe it means saving gasoline because you don't want to go higher, or, it's just, I feel like it, it says necessary, and I'd like to know what that means. And also this regulation that says altitude allowing if power unit fails, emergency landing without undue hazard to persons or property on the surface. The lower you are, the more hazard you create for people on the surface, the less time you have to maneuver if you have a problem. So that's what I think this is telling us. And I'll take your questions if you have any later. I'm going to move on. So this is the next flight level. So this is 6,600 feet to 7,500 feet. These planes are flying within the FAA regulations, but it's about 33% of the total aircraft that traversed Louisville. In the last slide, it was 41% were lower than 1,000 feet, just for comparison. You can notice that this is a mixture of probably jet aircraft and flight training. You can see some of the telltale kinds of things where they're doing touch and goes, but you also see flights that just go off and go off the map. Those would be probably somebody, a flight service or somebody flying to another city or something like that. Not, not flight schools. And then next, we have the higher flying aircraft. These are most certainly jet aircraft and carriers. And you see that there's nothing that's happening around Erie Airport or Boulder Airport. They're just flying and they're leaving town. And this is about 15% of the total aircraft that are flying over Louisville. And one final look here, I decided to give you a graphic of flights that are flying between 5,000 and 6,100 feet, as I'm calling them, low overpasses. So this is less than 500 feet above the ground in Louisville, above the highest point in Louisville. Now, most of these are probably helicopters, and you can see 180 divided by 30 is, 6 a day at these lower altitudes. But I think you can also see that it looks like there are indeed some fixed wing aircraft here. And I think that this could be looked into in terms of low flying aircraft. But it's also important to know that this is a small number compared to 5,000. All right. Let me catch up here. Okay, so I'm going to change gears here. And the next slide is...
Mayor, do you mind if I ask a question before we change gears?
Yeah, sure.
I was just hoping we could hold questions till the end, so keep it brief, please. Go ahead, Councilman.
I'm just looking for clarification of the color that.
Yeah.
Does a flight become, the flight doesn't seem to change color over time.
Yes,
So
that's a great question.
Okay, because yes, it's red. Does it become blue, or is it if it's ever blue? It's always blue. I don't get how the color
Yeah,
coding
okay.
works.
Well, if you look at my little asterisks here, this is the fine print. Minimum altitude is valid only in the Louisville selection area. So I didn't choose to change the color for the altitudes once they left Louisville. And I'm highlighting low altitudes. That's a great question. Does that clarify?
A little bit. I think I'm just, again, I'm confused. Like if a flight is red when it's over Louisville, and that if you go back 2 slides, that one is, in that low range, 1,000 feet.
Yeah, under 1,000 feet.
It was under 1,000 feet above ground. while it was going over Louisville, but it might have started lower when it was at RMMA, and it might get higher when it leaves. But as it passes through Louisville, it's red. So it's red everywhere. But it
Yeah,
really only pertains to the Louisville rectangle.
that's correct. That's correct. And it's going to be lower at RMMA because they started about 5,663 feet, I think are their runways. So one of the reasons that I didn't put colors on the map for RMMA was they were all going to be the same color. So I just chose to make it black. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Next slide is as a study of the last 3 years. And this is a pretty easy one to grasp. 2019, 2020, 2021, almost 3,000, 3,860. And this is the year of COVID, by the way, which kind of surprised me because the actual volume at the airport actually went down in 2020, but the volume over Louisville went up. And again, this year in June, 5,043. Just a minute, I'm going to catch up with my notes here. So I did a little calculation. That means that the 2019 to 2020 flights increased 26%, and the overpasses increased by 30%. Going from 2020 to 2021, the flights increased by 35%. The overpasses increased by 30%. So you see a significant increase in flights over just over the last 2 years. Okay. The next slide is flights per day. So you can see that there's a lot of weather variation that occurs with the flights, but I want to highlight a couple of things. Here we have 255 flights overpasses, excuse me, I should be careful. 255 overpasses over Louisville on June the 2nd and June the 3rd. What does that mean? That means about 14.4 average overpasses in the 18 most flown hours. I'll show you why I'm going to divide by 18, but that's an average overpass of about every 4.2 minutes. Now, averages lie a little bit because it's not a clockwork of flights. It can be 3 or 4 flights at a time, but averages help us understand the general thing that's going on here. And then June 26th, which is kind of the minimal day of the year, is about 100 overpasses. That's right here. And that's an overpass at about every 10 minutes. So between 10 minutes, from 4 minutes to 10 minutes. That's the range in the month, taking into account the daily variation. Next slide is telling you about how many, for the month of June, how many flights were in each hour of the day. So in other words, this bar right here tells you that between 9 and 10 in the morning over the month of June, there were 582 flights. What does that mean? That means 19.4 flights per hour on average, or every 3 minutes. For the busiest day, oh, excuse me. Yeah, that's right, every 3 minutes. But then I dove into the data. I'm not going to show you that, but the busiest day, June the 3rd, was actually an average rate of about 1 3/4 minutes per flight. And you can see that in this area, there is almost no hour of the day that there isn't a flight, at least a couple of flights in the month. So 1 a.m. to 2 a.m., 3 flights, there's a handful, but they are there. Then the flights begin at 5 a.m. approximately 1 per day, and then go up from there. Next slide. In the next slide, I'm showing a comparison between overflights of Louisville versus, I'm so sorry about that. It's okay, I see. I've got a keyboard problem here that's assisting me. Overflights of Louisville versus overflights of Arvada. So this is where the selection area being the same is important. This is the same size selection area. And these sides of this, it's actually a square, even though it looks like a rectangle because of map projection. These sides are about 5 kilometers or about 3 miles on a side. So about 10 square miles, just to give you a perspective on that. You've seen this before, 5,000. Arvada in the same period is 827. So what does that mean? 827 is equal to 27 and a half overpasses a day and averaging about 1.5 overpasses per hour on average. For Louisville, we're averaging in the same time period about 9.3 overpasses per hour. That's about a 6-to-1 difference in overpasses. My last color slide is something new that I've done. In this visualization, I'm looking at where flights originate and where they terminate. And this gives me a little different view of what's going on. So the first product of this new software is the possibility of showing you a comparison of how many flights arrive and depart from the different airports. So up here is the airport near Fort Collins. This is Longmont. This is some private airport. This is Erie. And this is without RMMA. On the right is RMMA plus all of the other airports. So you can see the relative impacts, and you can also see the relative direction. Again, this is kind of equivalent to the first slide that I showed you in black. It shows the same information, but it's only for 2 days in June, so it's not as dense. Okay, so that's the end of the slides. I'm going to talk a little about next steps. As Jeff said, we're going to try to make a similar presentation to the Community Noise Roundtable. Going to support and facilitate flight path studies. I can overlay arrows and graphics on top of this, and I can also underlay aircraft maps, such as the aircraft used, so we can kind of get a sense of that. So this can be a tool to allow that. Engage with community and CNR to propose flight paths. So again, kind of saying the same thing. Continue the focused engagement with CNR and RMMA. And the last one here, collaboration with FAA and federal regulation partners. I know that at least Mr. Negus's office is very interested in what's going on here, and there are possible federal approaches. I mean, I understand that the politics of this sort of thing are pretty hard to broach at this place where we are in our country, but there is legislation that might help here, and I'd like to do anything I can to push that forward. And with that, questions and feedback.
Michael, thank you for taking the time to take us through what you've been working on and to help the community really visualize what people are experiencing. We get a lot of complaints from people asking, well, how has this changed over time? What's happening to me? What does this look like? So your information here really helps people understand what they are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to turn it back over to Councilmember Lipton if he wants to add anything or tell us about his next steps or what he'd like our help with.
Well, no, I also want to thank Mike. Mike has put an amazing amount of effort and time into all this, and it's it's like one picture tell 1,000 words, and I think this is having this stuff visualized is very important. to our citizens. And like Mike said, the next steps is to possibly present this to the CNR and work with the airport staff, the CNR, and other parties to see if this kind of software and this type of visualization and data collection can help in developing flight paths that might actually help us and our northern neighbors and take corridors that already exist and try to get at a minimum voluntary compliance through the noise abatement program, and perhaps later on actually getting the FAA and the aircraft traffic control people to mandate certain paths for these types of operations. So this is just this is just the beginning of a long journey, and I think Mike did a great job, and presentation was terrific, as well as the visualizations. So with that, I'd like to open it up to council. If anybody has any questions, I don't know if you were going to take comments from the public, but I think some people from the public are watching this tonight.
We'll turn it
Thanks
to
again.
council. We'll turn it to Councilmember Brown as the alternate on the community noise roundtable and ask if he has anything to add or has any questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment. I want to thank Mike for all of his work. He has done the community of Louisville an amazing service, as has Councilmember Lipton with his service on the community noise roundtable here. I just wanted to mention that I think it's really important. It's clear to me from looking at this data why Jefferson County and some of our southern neighbors may not see this noise problem as much of a problem as we do. We certainly take the brunt of these flights. So we'll have to continue to use this kind of information to work with them to get the kind of relief that our community needs. So thanks again, Mike, and thank you for your efforts, Councilmember Lipton.
Councilmember Lay.
Yes, I echo everything that Councilmember Brown just said, and thank you, Mike, for all your great work here. I know you had to cover a lot of ground, on the ground, as it were, instead of in the air. But if you go back to one of your first slides, the one that has the 4410, I guess that's the. Can you pull that slide up again?
I think I need to share again my screen.
I just want to get clarity on a
Sure.
definitional point.
Absolutely. Can you see it?
Yes. And I know you explained it very, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I just want to understand again, when you're talking about the difference between flights, because you do this, throughout the rest. But I want to understand flights versus overpasses, why the difference, and then why the difference between what you have here and what the RMMA might show in their data. I don't need to know what their number is. I'm just interested in making sure when we have to explain some of this to others that we define things right.
I think I'll answer your second question first. I think it is possible to reconcile those two numbers as soon as I understand exactly how they count things. It's unclear. I've done some research on websites, FAA in particular, and it's not completely clear how each airport does it. I see that there are general guidelines, and I would have to know specifically, but one of the big differences will be that I believe that when they count flight ops, as they call them, that would be a takeoff or a landing. So if in my circumstance, if a flight leaves RMMA, goes and does whatever and comes back to RMMA, that's one flight. And they will probably count that as two. And that's probably the lion's share of the difference that I'm seeing. But there are other subtle differences that exist because of the way that data collection happens that would tend to have smaller errors. And when I say smaller, I mean on the order of 1 or 2%.
Go ahead.
No, I was finished.
Well, on that particular point, you don't see any, I don't know, goofiness or maybe nefarious activity going on in how the data is collected by RMMA.
I would have no insight into that.
Yeah, just not any.
No, and I don't
Not
see
much
any
more
reason for them
information.
to
I get it.
do
I'm not
anything.
suggesting it. I just want to understand that the
Yeah.
difference between the way you're doing it and theirs is
Right.
simply to be simple about this and be able to explain it in the way you are.
Right. Well, again, I want to repeat what I said earlier because I think it bears repeating. This box, it is what I'm using for counting. Now, if I took this box and I slid it a little to the left or I slid it a little to the right, I'd probably get a little different answer. But generally speaking, it's going to be pretty close to the same answer. You know, you can start to quibble at the edges about this, but the point of this is to show an overview, not to count every single flight.
And I get that.
Yeah.
What about the other?
Okay,
difference
so
in
the first question, yes.
Mhm.
So flights and overpasses. So a flight, let's take a flight, we're taking off and we go over Louisville. And I notice that at the flight in my data. And I look at a code that is associated with that aircraft. So there's a unique code, a unique identifier, essentially a license plate, a digital license plate that it has to transmit along with its data. So when it does that, I note, flight, X has flown over Louisville, and it, does whatever it does, and then it comes back through Louisville. I notice it's inside my selection area. I look to see, have I seen this flight before? If I have, I don't count it again as a flight, but I count it as an overpass. Okay. So the reason I do that is because I think that the impact is really overpasses, right? Yeah, it's not flights. I mean, there's 600 more encounters with Louisville than there are flights. And I think that's what people experience. So that's what I'm trying to count.
Thanks, Michael. Any other questions, Councilmember Lay?
Nope.
All right, we'll take it over to members of the public who would care to comment on this agenda item. If any members would care to comment on this agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney, I had seen your hand before and then I didn't see it. Did you want to comment before public comment or did you want to comment after?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll wait until public comment is over. Thank you.
All right, sorry, I'm sorry for missing you there. So back to public comment. If any members of the public would care to comment, please raise your hand at this time. And again, please tell us your name and your address at the beginning of your comments, and you'll have 3 minutes and you'll see the timer on the screen. If you could please help out by sticking to the 3 minutes, that would be great. And we do have one member of the public that has pooled their time. And so the two members are both here, but only one of them will be able to speak. And so that member will get 6 minutes. And so the city clerk will notify me when it's the member that has registered that they're pooling their time, and we'll set the clock for 6 minutes, just to be clear to everybody on how that works. And anyone is able to pool their time. You just both have to be present, and only one of you gets to speak. So with that, we'll go in order. And the first person to comment this evening is Vicki Lawrence.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you. I've lived in Louisville since 1992. I've been in the Front Range area here actually since 1978, my whole life in Boulder County. And I'm really horrified by the airplanes in the last more than 2 or 3 years. And I kind of wish your data had gone back previous to 2019. And I'm wondering what we can do to stop. I mean, it sounds like the airport wants to increase their activity there. I don't know if it's more flight schools. I know I've heard noise about wanting to have scheduled airlines out of there, which I assume would be bigger planes, jets that would probably be noisier. And what can we do to stop that from happening if they're flying over us? And how can we actually decrease the flights that are happening? I honestly can't live with the level that's here now. And I just am sort of always in this debate of at what point am I going to say I've had it? And I just have to move away from here. It's so stressful. These planes wake me up in the middle of the night, early in the morning. They just go on all day sometimes. And your data was interesting because I find Saturdays to be the worst day, probably when more people are doing taking flight school lessons and whatnot. That usually is the worst day for me, but it does vary a lot. Today it was not too bad, but some days I just want to get an anti-aircraft missile out and start shooting them down. Anyway, thank you. I would just like to see a decrease, not even just leaving it at the level it's at. Thanks.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I can say where I live. I live at 511 West Spruce Way.
Thank you. And next up, we have Deborah Atchison.
Mayor, Ms. Atchison is pooling her time with Ms. Lehman, so if you give me a moment,
Perfect.
I'm gonna.
And so Bree Lehman is going to use the time for Bree and Deborah Atchison. And so Bree, I believe you emailed the clerk a presentation, or you're going to show a presentation. So that's happening. Thank you all for your patience.
Ms. Atchison, I'm promoting you to panelist. I think you need to accept that on your end. Now you can unmute and share your screen with the audience.
Okay, it's Bree Lehman who is giving the presentation, and I'm giving my 3 minutes to Bree.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Lehman, you can share your screen with the presentation if you'd like. And you are muted as well.
Here we go.
All right.
Okay, I think we've got it now.
City Clerk,
Can everybody hear me?
We can go ahead and start the timer.
Okay, great.
Right.
Thanks. My name's Bree Lehman and I live in Old Town Lafayette, and I'm gonna really try to barrel through this because there's a lot of information that needs to be covered. One of Michael's slides that he brought up was a very busy day of flight traffic, which was June 3rd of this year. I received this image from the noise officer at DIA. This is Old Town Lafayette in the center.
I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt you, Bree. We're
sorry.
not seeing your shared screen.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Oh, you can't, sorry.
There's a green box at the bottom of the screen that says share screen. You'll have to click it.
Entire screen, okay. Yep, there we go. Okay, great. Sorry about that.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Got it myself. Oh no, I appreciate it.
There we go. We can see
Okay,
her.
okay, perfect. So this is the flight traffic image I was talking about, and I'm speaking from Lafayette, and there's a reason for that. And so I think we've all now seen Michael's presentation that was really thorough and in what kind of impact we're all experiencing here. And I'd like to go into some of the other information about that. So Lafayette's not considered part of the airport influence area. Lafayette was not created as part or not added to as a member to the Roundtable, even though we do border the Class D airspace, which is one of the factors for a seat on the board. And Lafayette, I think a month and a half ago now, formally petitioned to be added to the Roundtable and have yet to receive a response to that. So I think Lafayette and Louisville are sort of related in our concerns and sort of our general position in Boulder County. So I appreciate you letting me take the time to speak to you from this. And so this is just an image of the Class D airspace is the outer circle here, which you can see encompasses Lafayette and Louisville. A lot of talk from Rocky Mountain used to be the Northern Flight Training Area. They use that as a lot to say, well, this is where all the traffic needs to go because this is where all the flight maneuvers can take place. So this is not something that's sanctioned by the FAA. This is just a habit or a practice that's been condoned by Rocky Mountain, and part of the reason why we've increased so significantly in our overflights in our areas. So I am part of the group that perhaps some of you have heard of, the Save Our Skies Alliance. We're a group of concerned citizens from the many areas that are affected by operations at Rocky Mountain Metro Airport. So Louisville, Lafayette, Westminster, Broomfield, all of these areas. So we have a lot of concerns other than just the traffic, safety. There's lead in the aviation fuel that's used by the piston engine aircraft, obviously noise, and then a total loss of local control for those of us who don't have a voting interest in the operations at Rocky Mountain. So plane crashes, I'm just going to touch on this lightly. We've had 2 incidents this year. Once was in Westminster, once was in Lafayette, where a flight school plane out of Rocky Mountain had engine failures. This one landed in the dog park in Westminster, and the other one made an emergency U-turn and landed on 287 and Isabel Road in Lafayette. So this is not an idle concern for those of us who live here. These planes do crash. They do overfly residential areas and quite lowly very often, and we have a real concern about the safety of the people under these flight paths. So one really huge concern that nobody ever talks about is lead. So lead over Louisville and all of these areas. Many of those flight paths that we were shown represent leaded exhaust fuel. So as of 2018, which is the last year information was available, 72% of the airborne lead pollution in Colorado comes from general aviation and avgas. So in 2018, that was approximately 20,000 pounds of lead that was released into the atmosphere from general aviation. So lead is really dangerous to all people. It's especially dangerous to kids. It creates learning and behavior problems, anemia, lower IQ, and can have some even more significant impacts. And the CDC, so our government entity, says that it does not matter how you're exposed, it's dangerous, but breathing in lead particles is the most dangerous way that you can inhale lead. So there was a recent study at Reed Hillview Airport that basically, it was a 10-year study. It was a CSU researcher. We've got data on our website if you want to look further into it, but children living downwind of the airport had a similar blood levels to children in the Flint, Michigan water crisis. And in some instances, those levels were doubled. So lead in Flint, they could see in the water. They had a very visible representation of the damage that it was doing to their communities. And unfortunately for us, we don't have that. But what we do have is the noise. And every time you hear a plane overhead, you can be reasonably certain, if it's a piston engine plane, that it's dumping leaded fuel over our areas. So Reed Hillview and Rocky Mountain have very similar flight operations on a yearly basis. So I think it's a relevant comparison to make. So Denver Water's going into a huge expenditure to get rid of lead in the pipes. So why aren't we doing anything about the air? EPA regulates it. The FAA can choose whether or not to implement those regulations, and local airports have fully within their control to sell unleaded aviation fuel alternatives, which do exist, and only Vance brand sells anything other than this leaded gas. Interestingly, the company that makes the lead additive for aviation fuel is based in Littleton, and they got in a lot of legal trouble for selling leaded additive to other countries after lead was banned in Western countries. There's also a huge amount of impact on health that we just don't have time to get into with noise. It creates hypertension. There's so many health impacts. And so it's not just a matter of we're a bunch of people complaining about the noise. It has a really significant health impact on our lives.
That is 6 minutes.
Sorry?
That's 6 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bree. You can email council at any time, so you can email us the rest of the slides. Thanks for your comments tonight.
Thank you.
Next up for public comment, we have Kat M.
Unmute. Good evening. Can you hear me, Ashley?
Yes, we can.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I just have a question of Michael. I live in Superior at 1457 Hyacinth Way. And I saw that your data, Michael, addressed Louisville and that square. Is there a way that you can do a presentation that includes Superior?
Absolutely.
Has anyone from the trustees asked you to make the presentation?
Well, I think,
Sorry, Michael, I know you're not in council, so you don't know this, but we don't interact during public comment. This is our opportunity to listen to folks. And so she'll
Okay.
have 3 minutes to tell us what she'd like to tell us. And then at the end, we can respond if there are things that council members want to say or if there's time. So please just, Kat, give us your questions and comments, and then we'll get back to all the members of the public after the period.
Well, I see that I have 2 minutes left. Can I
Wait.
give that to Bree Lehman, please, so she can finish her presentation?
So the way our pooling works.
So no, if
No.
it's no, you can just, that's just short. Okay, thank you.
We can give you your time back though, so I didn't
I
mean to
don't,
interrupt you.
no, I want my question answered. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I note down what everybody says during public comment periods, and we do our best to get to everybody at the end of it. So sorry about the awkwardness, but this is the period of time for the members of the public. And just for everybody's information, the time pooling maxes out at a maximum of 6 minutes of time that anyone can pool. And so Bree got the maximum amount of time. And we always take comment and emails and video and things like that to our city council email address. So we do really want to hear from people. It's just that we have a lot of business to get to, and we have a lot of very engaged residents. So if we extend the public comment period too long, we would never get through all of our business. And so I understand that it seems harsh, and I apologize for that. But we try to work in the very best process we can to hear from everybody. Next up, we have Konstantin Azarov.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, yeah, so my name is Konstantin and I live at 581 Spruce Circle. I'm also a pilot, so I thought I'd give you a perspective from the other side. I fly mostly out of Boulder Airport, but I did a few training flights out of Rocky Mountain. So first of all, I want to thank Michael for his presentation. It was very interesting. I just have 2 comments. The increase from 2019 to 2020 may be explained by the ADSB mandate that went in 2020. So if the ADSB is where he got his data from, that probably was what caused it. And second, briefly on the minimum altitude of overflights, if I were to guess, the airplanes that registered less than 1,000 feet were probably going back to the airport, so on the south side of Louisville. I can pretty much assure you that no pilot wants to cross FAA and violate any regulations or fly very low because it's dangerous. But my constructive comment here is this. When I read the Rocky Mountain Airport noise abatement procedures, they struck me as very inadequate. If you look at them, they don't even depict noise sensitive areas. And every other airport I flew out of also proposes flight paths that you can take to, decrease the impact on the resident and stuff like that. So in my opinion, it would be most fruitful to try and convince the Rocky Mountain Airport and the flight schools to make a better, more detailed noise abatement procedures that people would follow. The current procedures encourage pilots to avoid residential areas, but I mean, this is just basically saying nothing because this is already encouraged by the regulations. And in my experience, I did maybe 10 training flights out of Rocky Mountain. Nobody does that. This is similar to why we have rules of the road, right? And this is also, I think, fruitful because this action, I think, does not require any FAA approval or anything like that. I mean, the tower has to participate, but maybe it's not that bad. So of all the options that are present, constraining traffic seems the hardest because AOPA and every pilot will basically fight this tooth and nail. But noise abatement procedures are generally followed by the pilots. And if Rocky Mountain Airport and flight schools provided better procedures, I'm sure the flights wouldn't go all over Louisville. There is really no reason for that. That's all.
Thank you for your comments. Next up, we have Austin. Austin, you might be muted on your end. We cannot hear you. Sorry, Austin, we're just having trouble hearing you. We can't hear anything at all. I'm not sure if your microphone is turned on or not, so we will go to the next caller and come back to you. So next, we have Elizabeth H.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth Heidel. I live in actually in Broomfield and Skystone subdivision, so not in Louisville, but I've become so impacted by RMMA flight operations that I've devoted a considerable amount of my time to trying to understand the airport, all the multi-layers, the things, potential solutions. I participate in the noise roundtable meetings, the AAB meetings, et cetera. And so I try to be very informed instead of, going off half-cocked about this, that, or the other. And I just want to say straight away that I've never considered a solution to be closing the airport. I understand it has an economic benefit. And what I also want to say is it's not an us against them situation. It is, we are, there's over 1,700 people. I'm involved in SOS also, Save Our Skies Alliance, because something, trying to get something done. 1,700 people signed our petition just to ask RMMA to update their master plan, because it seems really clear they don't want to, the face of the issue is they don't want to have the FAA allocate that $500,000 to updating their master plan because they can use it for repaving or whatever. But really beneath the surface is a lawsuit against that Rock Creek HOA has pending against Jefferson County right now that's going to be heard in Boulder beginning the week of October 11th. So if they publish new noise contours that are required as part of the master planning process, that could certainly hurt their position against, the allegation that they're violating the navigation easements. There's also as lots of other environmental things, analysis that would have to be done. And it's quite interesting. I've gone back through the Airport Advisory Board meeting minutes since 2018, and it was actually on their agenda in the beginning of 2020, I believe, starting to plan for the 2021 master plan. So it makes it even more conspicuous how it just kind of went by the wayside. Nothing was ever said about it. They hire somebody to do a strategic business plan that's just inadequate. Lastly, I just want to say, I really, really, really sincerely appreciate your efforts, Louisville City Council, Mayor, everyone. You seem to be taking this more seriously than any other governments. You need only look at the last two CNR meetings to see how dysfunctional that has become to not getting a solution. And so I appreciate your efforts. Please keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Austin, and hopefully it works this time. Oh, we can hear you.
All right, excellent. I switched over to my phone real quick. Yes, I live in Superior as well. As you can see, this is really affecting not only Louisville, but all the surrounding towns. So yes, I live in Superior at the townhomes across from Safeway 2855 Rock Creek Circle. I'd like to make one quick comment about, I believe his name was Konstantin Azarov, who spoke just a couple moments ago, speaking as a pilot. It's nice to hear a pilot come in and provide his input. Obviously the community that's affected by this has been trying to find some sort of solution that's a cooperative solution that works for everybody. And it's been really difficult to find engagement with pilots that just don't dismiss the fact that it's a problem at all. And as to his specific comment that the noise abatement, the Quiet Skies noise abatement program, I believe it was updated in the last year or two. And he is very correct in the fact that I remember the previous noise abatement had distinct lines, for example, cutting off the edge of Superior and putting it in black saying, this is a residential area, you please try to avoid. Any specific marking of residential areas is no longer included in the quiet skies. Even with that said, I don't see very many pilots at all. I mean, I'd be generous to say that 1 out of 10 pilots attempts to avoid flying over Superior, and they very conveniently fly all the way completely over Superior and then continue right over Louisville. So I just don't see any buy-in from the aviation community on what unfortunately can only be a voluntary program. I'd also like to second, for example, Bree Lehman's presentation there. Lead is a very important factor that I think should also be being considered. Just a quick note, like for example, just the last couple of weeks, Algeria was the last country to eliminate lead from their being sold for motor vehicles. We began eliminating it 4 decades ago from our first world US here, but we still allow it to be burned over our heads. And then real quick, I have 3 comments for the presentator. What would qualify as a flight there is that when the ADS-B is flipped on, has he quickly done a look at all the flights going north over Louisville, Lafayette, Superior? I know 30 to 40% of them. He said, go over Louisville. Could you give a number on what percent go to the north? And a comment on his 18 hours of flown time. How did he kind of come up with that? 18 hours a day is the most used.
Thank
time.
you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other members of the public care to comment on this agenda item tonight? And if you've dialed in by phone, you can dial *9 to have a hand raised on your behalf. Next, we have Brad Walker. Hi, Brad.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Walker, and I live in the town of Superior. I'm also a pilot who flies out of Rocky Mountain Metro Airport. My comments tonight are about the presentation being made by Michael Burek. First, Mr. Burek seems reasonably competent in creating PowerPoint presentations, but I can find no professional certification that qualifies him as to speak about FAA federal air regulations. In addition, I can find no professional affiliations that would qualify him to make aviation-related comments. Michael Burek holds himself out to be well-versed in FAA flight regulations, but has no certification or affiliation to back that up. The presentation has no annotation as to the source of the data from which it was compiled. I would remind Mr. Lipton and Mr. Burek, the FAA only takes action on data that is certified and meets their standards. The data that one receives from these public data sites has been processed before dissemination. I won't go into the gory details, but official FAA data is also backed up by radar information. Mr. Burek quotes FAA Federal Regulation 91.119. What he fails to follow is the pilots are likely either departing or landing at Rocky Mountain Metro. In addition, any plane that is over 1,000 feet above ground level is clearly operating within the guidelines. In one slide, he pointed out there exists an obstacle in Louisville whose height is 5,700 feet. Mr. Burek makes the wrong assumption. This implies pilots should maintain a minimum altitude of 6,700 feet. I'd like to tell you tall landmarks are clearly distinguishable on FAA charts, not for the purpose of establishing minimum safe altitudes, but rather for pilot knowledge so they are able to safely avoid these tall objects. There's a slide that discusses the time of day that overflights take place. This slide represents 0 value. Nowhere the pilots are subject to any operational time of day restrictions. In addition, the FAA has no restrictions on time of day operations at RMMA. The only purpose of this slide is to make an ad hominem attack on the airport and the pilot community. Now, lastly, Mr. Lipton has shown a propensity to advocate for unlawful measures to be taken by the RMMA Noise Roundtable. You should have a letter from me concerning this. If the Community Noise Roundtable decides to take action on this presentation, I can assure you that legal scrutiny might be forthcoming to challenge the validity of the data and question the credentials of Michael Burek. I just want him and Mr. Lipton to be aware of this, as only certifiable data that meets the FAA standard can be used. Lastly, I'd like to point out, I flew the same airplane that made an off-field landing that Ms. Lehman used in one of her slides. It's extremely offensive to use someone's experience for your political advantage. This goes to show the extremes these emotional folks will resort to. Have a good evening, and I strongly wish I could present these comments in person. Respectfully, Brad Walker.
Thank you, Brad. And I think we all wish we could be back in person. I'm sure we're all tired of Zooming. Are there any other members of the public that would care to comment this evening? All right, seeing none, back over to council member questions or comments. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. I just first I want to thank the public for all the comments. You know, these open hearings are important for us to learn more about these topics. But you know, it's interesting because you know, as a council, we deliberate and debate on various issues, but this is one we all agree upon. You know, the noise, the nuisance, the health, a lot of things that were mentioned in the public comments. I think we all agree this is an issue. You know, and with that, I appreciate the public comments. Mike, thank you for all the data analysis you did. I do have respect for your work. I know you took it very seriously. And as Councilor Lipton said, you know, the pictures have really helped with this, but I want to thank Councilor Lipton and Councilor Brown for their work on this. You know, getting this whole CNR getting started is always a tough thing. And, you know, there's a lot of norming that goes on in the early stages. We wish it would go faster. And, you know, my feeling is that we just need to keep pressing this issue. We need to keep up the energy that Councilors Lipton and Brown are displaying at these meetings in representing Louisville. So I want to thank them for that. I also want to acknowledge the staff for all the work that they've done. And, you know, I get a lot of comments from citizens, you know, in Louisville, Superior, Lafayette, and I'm able to point them to our website where we're maintaining the most current information, the minutes in the meetings and so forth. But, you know, this is something that we need to maintain energy for, and I appreciate the effort so far. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney. Councilmember Lay.
Yeah, I too thank the members of the community that have shown up on this, and our councilor, you know, both Councilmember Lipton and Councilmember Brown have both been active in this, and Mayor, I know you have, and others have as well. And I think I agree that we need to keep up the activity. I also really do appreciate Mr. Azarov's comments, because for the same reason that I think Mr. Austin mentioned, it's nice to hear some constructive comments. I have yet to hear constructive comments from some of the pilots that have appeared before us, and I encourage even those to come up with something that we can use that might actually help push us toward a potential solution and accommodation here, because this is a very difficult issue. The data is just looking at your charts is just depressing. And one final thing I wanted to mention, there was Ms. Lawrence, Vicki Lawrence mentioned data from before 2019. I don't know that it's available, but I bet we'd see an even greater increase over time. And I know there are ways of pushing this, and we'll push on every potential lever we have to try to keep up the pressure on the folks that make the decisions on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So next steps from council members. Councilmember Lipton laid out a course for himself to continue participating in the roundtable, and trying to see if Michael could give a presentation there and some other things that he's going to work on. I wonder if the group would be supportive the suggestion of trying to pursue noise sensitive areas actually marked on the map at the airport. They did make some updates at our request, and they've been passing out those the voluntary noise abatement procedure. I might have the name wrong, but it's something along those lines. I apologize if I got the name wrong. So I wonder if the group would be all right with me following up with Commissioner Kraft-Tharp on that point, and Director Anslow to just see if they have any interest in continuing to update those maps with that suggestion. I see a couple thumbs up, but Councilmember Lipton has his hand up. Councilmember Lipton?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused, Mayor. The suggestion was to update the noise abatement procedure maps or some other maps.
Yeah, I might have the name wrong and I apologize for that, but the airport has made some adjustments and has updated and been doing the education around the noise abatement maps. And I wonder if it would be worth following up on the comment we received tonight to add some additional noise sensitive areas to the map to just help people understand which communities are complaining.
Well, I think next week we're going to discuss the ABC ×2 report. One of the recommendations made by ABC ×2 is to better define flight paths. But I think the recommendation also said as part of the voluntary abatement procedures. So, and that is something that would not necessarily have to be officially approved by the FAA or ATC. So I think that is the direction we're going to try to move towards, and that Director Anslow is supposed to give us a report next week and give us his thinking on how we might be able to do that. But I agree with you 100%. That probably is the path of least resistance. You can certainly talk to the county commissioner. That wouldn't hurt. But I think generally that's how it's going to go.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that the long-term path forward with redoing routes and things like that is more deliberate and long-term and will require more data collection from the FAA and all of those things. But if we can get any kinds of short-term wins, I think it's worth pursuing. So we'll go that from both angles. That sounds like a good plan. Councilmember Fahey?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I would just wanted to put in the suggestion or the idea, I guess. When I was at the Burbank airport a couple of months ago, there is a large sign on the side of the terminal that says that they voluntarily close the airport from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And there are just no flights in or out during those evening hours. If that would be something that might alleviate some of the issues with the noise waking people up and interfering with their sleep.
Thanks, Councilmember Fahey. Any other comments from council members? Well, Michael, we can't thank you enough for all your voluntary effort on this. I know there were a number of questions from folks about whether you would or wouldn't do additional work, and we can't sign you up for that. But I'm sure community members would be interested to see different visualizations, just because it is so powerful to see what we're experiencing. And before we sign off, I do just want to comment. There was mention that Congressman Neguse has been so attentive, and his staff members are on tonight. In the audience, there's 51 people listening right now, and I just want to thank the congressman for attending, and Kim Red from his staff for being here and working so closely with us on this. It really is an issue of federal concern, and so we can't do it alone, and the partnership is really incredible, and we have such a great leader in our area, so we're very lucky, and I'm very grateful on behalf of the community. Any other comments on this one? All right, with that, we'll take a 10-minute break. It's 8:32, and so we'll pause here for 10 minutes, and then we'll be back for our next agenda item after that. So see you at 8:42. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we're back from our break, and our next topic of discussion tonight is discussion direction on the recommended budget for 2022, including updated capital improvement plan for 2021 to 2026 and updated long-term financial plan for 2021 to 2026. We're going to set the public hearing for October 19th, 2021. And just as a brief introduction before I turn it over to our city manager, I wanted to say that on our first readings like this, when we're setting the public hearing, we typically don't get into a ton of detail on the budget. That's been our past practice, is to get a presentation at a high level, understand the components that'll be in the budget, and then we'll have more conversation about it at the public hearing. But with that said, if there are some high level points of things that we want changed around, folks are welcome to make those points. It's just that this is not the exhaustive and complete or last chance you'll have to talk about the budget. So with that, I'll turn it over to our city manager, Megan Davis.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Thanks so much for this opportunity to set the public hearing for our recommended budget for 2022 and to share with you the long-term financial plan. Our finance director, Kevin Watson, is going to give a very brief presentation and share some information, and then we look forward to having some time next week. Our entire meeting will be dedicated to discussing the budget, and that'll give us a good chance to get into more detail and discuss this a little bit further. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Watson.
Thanks, Megan. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can. Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we can.
I'm going to share my screen briefly. I trust everybody can see that PowerPoint. Okay, so this item starts on page 137 of your packet. This is the first presentation of the city manager's recommended operating and capital budget for 2022. Just a quick reminder regarding the budget adoption process. A 2022 operating and capital budget was developed during the 2021-2022 biennial budget process. So in developing the recommended 2022 budget, we did not start with a blank slate. We started with what was informally approved last November by City Council for 2022. The city's charter requires that the council adopt an annual budget each year. In November of last year, the council formally adopted the 2021 budget. In November of this year, council will be presented with a new and updated 2022 operating and capital budget for adoption. I just want to summarize some of the things within your packet. Much of the information that you see within the council communication and the attachments was presented and discussed in detail during the July 23rd budget retreat. Therefore, I'm just going to briefly summarize the contents of your packet, and then I'm going to turn the presentation over to the Public Works Director for a discussion on the utility funds. So beginning on page 137 of the packet is a summary of some of the items that we've included in response to our discussion at the July budget retreat. The information on the updated revenue assumptions is included on page 138 through 143 of the packet. These projections are very similar to what we discussed at the budget retreat. There has been some changes, and we can get into those at our study sessions, but it's a very similar look at what we discussed at the budget retreat. Note that we've received the preliminary assessed valuation from the Boulder County Assessor, and we have included that information on pages 140 to 141. We can discuss that also in more detail if the council likes at one of the upcoming study sessions on the budget. The information on the updated expenditure estimates and targets begins on page 144 of the packet. Note that we've included some additional narrative beyond what we did at the budget retreat on some subtopics such as salary or wages and benefits, office space needs, the Night at the Rec program, and the American Rescue Plan Act. Beginning on page 150 of your packet is some narratives on some updates that we've made to the 2021-2026 capital improvement plan since you last saw that at the budget retreat. An updated interfund transfers matrix, which shows the proposed transfers between funds for 2022, is included on page 151. On page 153 is a grand total all funds presentation of the recommended 2022 budget. For each budgeted fund, the table contains the beginning fund balance, the revenue, the expected or expenses, and the projected ending fund balance. We also present the turnback percentages and amounts on that table. And then starting on page 154 of your packet is a summary of the long-term financial plan, which includes fund forecasts for all the city's major operating and capital funds. These are very similar pictures we looked at the budget retreat, but there have been some changes that we can discuss during the study session. Attached to the council communications are two files. The first is an updated listing of all the projects sorted by fund that are included in the 2021-2026 CIP. That starts on page 165 of your packet. And as we did for the budget retreat, all the changes from the original CIP that was developed during the biennial process last year are highlighted in red. The second attachment, beginning on page 172 of your packet, is a summary of the 2022 recommended budget. It contains all the revenue, operating expenditures, the capital outlay, the projected ending reserves for each fund. And that information, and there's information for 2019 and 2021, and that's presented for informational purposes and to give you some context as to the recommended budget. The recommended budget, what the subject of the discussion are the amounts that are highlighted in green on that schedule. Note that the information presented on these tables is rolled up into some relatively broad revenue and expenditure categories. We can drill down into any of these categories to provide more detailed information if the council desires. Schedule of the budget meetings. We have scheduled 2 study sessions to discuss the proposed budget. And as I said, we can provide more detailed information on any of the topics presented tonight within your packet or any other topics you'd like to discuss. So that ends my very brief presentation. Before I turn it over to the Public Works Director, I'm happy to try and answer any questions or accept any requests for any additional information or more detailed information that you would like presented at future study sessions.
I think that's a great start. And then let's turn it over to our Director of Public Works to hear from him, and we'll hold our questions or comments.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll pick it up from here, and I'm just working from the packet. So I will just talk from slide numbers, but essentially tonight we want to provide a really high level overview of what the staff and the utility committee works on, just to do a tiny bit of education, given some of the conversation around the fund balances at the last budget discussion and how those interact with the budget setting process. But essentially on page 65 or 60 of 65, there's different components that we look at as staff. Some of that is tap fees. That's like one-time revenue that comes in, like when a development comes in and they pay to connect to the system. Other revenues are monthly rates. We look at those revenues, we compare them to expenses, and then we get into different things around rate design. You'll hear us talk about the rate model. So as we're looking at all the different finances, we're looking 10 or 15 or 20 years in advance, and we're trying to put all these inputs into the model, and then it'll kind of generate what type of revenue we need to generate through monthly rates based off estimated tap fees, which are projected through our planning department, to decide what kind of rate increases that we need to do, if at all. On page 61, I wanted to set a context. We're kind of coming to the end of a 10-year chapter. Early in 2010 and 11, some activities started taking place to start doing more planning for the utility. There wasn't as much planning done prior to that. And then in 12 and 13, there were master plans put together for water and wastewater infrastructure. and stormwater infrastructure, which are each of your main utility funds. So you have a water fund, a wastewater fund, and a stormwater fund. Those roll up into an overall combined utility fund. But we put some master plans together. We did a really large rate study. It included a committee of citizens and business partners that looked at our methodologies and philosophies and guided us on how we should set and target rates within the city. And out of that came what we call our rate model, which is just one of the world's most complex spreadsheets. So from there, we slowly worked towards completing all these various projects in the master plans from 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We're still continuing, but we're starting to kind of finish what was in those master plans. And then in 22, what we're planning to do is renew these master plans. So we've completed a 10-year cycle, and we're getting ready to complete another 10-year cycle. And why that matters is I'll explain here on this next slide on page 61. So we've got a lot of large factors that are influencing us over the next 12 to 18 months. One thing that's been hitting us all summer long on all projects is just the ability to get labor or supply and material issues out there. It's a very dynamic environment right now. It doesn't change how much money comes in, but we are seeing increased expenditures for projects. Things are more expensive to do. We don't know the impacts on the federal infrastructure bill, but we know there's opportunities out there that we will chase, such as replacing lead service lines, things like that. It's not a problem that we think is huge within the city, but it's something that can be looked at. There's other opportunities within the bill too. Like I said, we're going to be updating these master plans. We've got long-range capital replacement that we still are planning for. And again, the longer out it is, the more uncertainty there is. We're negotiating several different agreements with different customers within the utility for amounts of water or that we can guarantee them above and beyond what may be for their tap size. So with that comes different fees for expansion. And then we also have additional development that could come in, the biggest being Red Tail Ridge, if that does not happen in the long run. So we have all these big factors. And so as we're trying to put the rate model together, we are also on, and this is on page 62 of the packet, we are following a timeline for the budget process. We're also following a timeline for the rate setting process. The budget process starts earlier in the year. And we submit a lot of information to the finance department, and they do a lot of information gathering to provide you all these graphs and presentations you see. At the same time, we're also trying to plug in things into the rate model. And then we're also looking ahead on the rate model, because as the budget gets adopted, things are still fluid with projects and whatnot. So we try to keep the rate model as up to date as we can. We run various scenarios depending on what developments come in or what unknown expansion fees may play out. So as we follow these different timelines, in some ways they line up and in some ways they don't. The budget process is a little more static, a little more step-by-step. The rate process is also step-by-step, but we're also looking at the rate model a lot more frequently. The staff looks at the rate model probably once a month, and we're updating kind of what we know is going on out there. The utility committee is probably discussing some piece of the rate model every 2 to 3 months. So there's a lot of attention around what's going on with rates, what's going on with cash balances, how it affects the long-term plans for the CIP or the fund balance. So there's a lot of conversations that are happening in the background. They don't happen at the council level because we've been delegated to work on these things in the utility committee. These folks, they have to absorb a lot of information. They make a lot of tough decisions. They push the staff to look at different methodologies. They push the staff to check our methodologies and look at different sensitivity analysis, raw data, things like that, to make sure we're staying relevant to what we're doing for our proposed rate increases. And so as we work through all these processes, this circles around kind of to what Kevin had mentioned at the last budget conversation, is there's an ultimate fund balance that we keep. And one thing that was mentioned at that last conversation was looks like there's a lot of money in that fund balance. It's something we should look at. And it is something we look at. And in fact, as we look at our working rate model for the next few years coming up, we're already looking at how the tap fees are affecting us. You know, we go from averaging $200,000 a year in tap fees to several million. So that's a big change. We look at kind of different things like what projects are coming up out there, or what project increases are happening a little faster than the budget process considers. So there's all these little differences. Turnback's a big difference. The budget looks at turnback. The model is a little more conservative, doesn't look at turnback. But we have all these various policies we follow through, and a discussion that ultimately comes to the city council around January or February after the utility committees looked at it 2 or 3 times. And we recommend a set of rates to you all. And then generally by March, we adopt them. They go into effect in May, and then they show up on a June bill. The last, out of the last 3 of the last 5 years, we've had 0% increases. And we've had very minimal for the other 2, like a 1% and a 3%. But our current working rate model is right now we are projecting out for the next 10 years, 0% increases. And this doesn't, it feels a little surreal that you can say that. But in general, the city's done a lot to invest in our infrastructure. And so it's up to date. We've worked hard operationally to be lean and work smarter, not harder. So over 10 years, we've actually reduced our operating budget by about $500,000. And then right now, Louisville's just got a lot going on with development, and that's got a big influx of tap fees. So these are all things we're keeping an eye on. I think the biggest thing for, and then we look at these for each fund. So if you go through the various pages,
Hey,
yes.
just in case people are following along with the whole packet and not just this section, I just want folks to know it's on page 199 that we're on now. And I don't know if someone can actually put this on the screen, but it would help the public follow along.
Here, I will, yeah, let me share. I was trying to be too efficient. I'm having a moment with Zoom. Let's see. There we go. All right. Okay, can everyone see the water fund cash reserves graph?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will back up and I'll just start. There is one overall combined utility fund. And as I said, we're talking through all those things. We're talking through the current budget model and the budget setting, and then we're looking even farther out to decide, you know, what things are way out there that are going to cost money. We look at the way we set rates as either real time or smoothing. So real time, we would say, hey, in 10 years, we have a large project of $10 million. And so we will wait till that $10 million is due, and we will do one huge rate increase to deal with that at that point in time. Or we do smoothing, which we say, hey, we need $10 million in 10 years. So we're going to adjust the rate incrementally to build up to that $10 million. And then somewhere in between those two approaches, which this is another area where the utility committee has a lot of discussion, is we discuss, should we go get loans for this? Or should this be paid with cash? And you look at those sensitivities, you look at intergenerational equity, you look at how long you have to save, you look at what the interest rates are. A big reason for much of what we did 10 years ago is we had to do a very large build a new wastewater treatment plant. That was a $30 million project roughly. We did roughly a $10 million floodplain improvement project to downtown. And so we went out and we borrowed that money, but we had master plans, we had rate models, and we had a plan of attack of how we were going to go borrow that money and the time frame in which we had to implement all that. So we do have a fund that we look at for each utility. So again, there's water, wastewater, stormwater. Water is the biggest one by far. And so you can just see this is what the water fund looks like right now. Wastewater is a little bit smaller. It's more sensitive to projects. And then finally, stormwater is the smallest and is the most sensitive to projects. In fact, stormwater is one of the hardest ones to do projects in because the project costs are generally so big compared to the amount of money that we bring in from the monthly fees. And so that's something where smoothing plays an important role. But overall, I think what we want to just point out is, again, I'm going to go back to, we did 10 years worth of planning and execution, and now we're about to go into a new planning phase. We have all these outside factors that are currently working with us. In a sense, it's a perfect storm for Louisville, but it makes it challenging. The perfect storm part is all these good things are aligning where we don't think we're going to have rate increases. It is very possible in the long term we could look at having a rate decrease. We just don't have enough information yet to be completely confident in that. But in general, a lot of these factors that are adding up, the influences are much bigger than what our general fund balance is over. So they can push big swings on what we're going to have to do. We could have a lot of revenues come in and not really identify a lot in our master plan that needs done. And that means there's a generous amount of money in our reserves that we need to talk through and understand how to spend that down or reduce rates. Could be that we identify various expenses that are needed that go above and beyond revenues, and then therefore we're still in a smoothing scenario. So we're kind of in a pendulum mode where we've gone from having more expensive than money coming in, and now it's pendulating over where it looks like we might have a little more money coming in than expenses. But again, we need 12 to 18 months to kind of work through these conversations with the utility committee. So just kind of summarizing, we've got an action plan that we as staff are kind of working through, and we've talked through this with the utility committee. We need to identify more information over the next 1 to 2 years to really make sure our model's fully representing all the need. And we need to align that with that fund balance. And then if it looks like our fund balance is staying too high, you got to look at what a spend down plan or a rate adjustment to address that will be. But the overall takeaway is that we look at this often, we talk about it often, we have plans for your investment, and overall those plans have played out where you have a good utility. In the last few years, we've won, our chief water plant operator has won manager of the year. Our water treatment plant won treatment plant of the year award. We just won a national safety award. We are CDPHE environmental leadership gold. That puts us in a realm with like Ball Aerospace and people like that push environmental stewardship. We've been published in many different magazines. And most of all, your utility is reliable. So with that, I'm just going to kind of close out. I just went through a lot of different information. There's a lot of details that we would be happy to go over with you one-on-one with staff if you want to dive into it. We're going to have an opening on our utility committee in the near future. So anyone that's interested in talking more, we can talk about that. But in general, I appreciate your time. I want to open it up for questions, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Director Coer. And so I'll actually turn it back over to our city manager, Megan Davis, and see if there's anything more in that presentation.
Thank you. I don't have anything to add at this time. Again, we're happy to take any comments or questions that you might have about either the proposed budget and the long-term projections and also the utility bill. And we will do our best to respond tonight. And if not, we are able to bring information forward for discussion next week.
Great, thank you so much. And so we'll turn it over to members of the public. If any members of the public would care to comment on this agenda item tonight, please raise your hand. And just know it's not your last chance to talk about the budget. We're setting the public hearing tonight for October 19th, 2021. All right, not seeing any public comment, we'll turn it back over to council members. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the city manager, Director of Finance, and the Director of Public Works for the presentation tonight. Something that I've said, and you've all heard me say, is this budget process is getting better and better. So it's easier to focus on the bigger and more important issues. I realize this is first reading, as unofficially first reading, whatever we call that, Mayor. But I do have a couple of things that I want to point out. I have concerns. First is the operating revenues do not cover the operating costs in the general fund. This is something that I've mentioned a few times in this process. It's something that I believe must happen through this process. So I'm looking forward for our discussion next week and potentially 3 weeks from now, if we continue that study session, to understand that more deeply and understand how we rectify that. I know that the operating expenditures exceeding the operating revenues is driving down the general fund balance, but that's not the way I believe it should happen. If there's an excess fund balance, it should be invested in such a way that either has direct benefit to the city, or as Councillor Dickinson has mentioned, somehow reduces future costs. The second thing that I'd like to point out that is a concern, I raised the idea of putting $1.5 million in the budget for the TMP, and that was done, but it was done at the expense of the paving budget, which is something I'm not sure how we got there or why that was done that way. And I do note, looking at page 159 of the packet, if you look at what's projected over 6 years, this year our fund balance in the CIP will be down just a few $100,000, and in year 2026 it'll be up to $6 million. Well, guess what? That number equals 4 times 1.5 million, which is what I was talking about all along. So there's no reason, in my opinion, to rob the paving budget to come up with that budget item. So that's just some high-level comments, and I look forward for us digging deeper in this and having more granular discussions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney. Councilmember Lipton.
Thank you very much. I agree with many of Pro Tem Maloney's comments, and I just wanted to mention that. But I also was wondering, Kevin, in the past that for at least the capital projects, we would have cut sheets describing the projects, and unless I missed something in the materials, I didn't see that. I noticed there were several new projects being introduced, but I have no idea what the scope and what the anticipated costs are, other than what's on the proposed budget. So I was wondering why haven't we seen the capital project descriptions, and what are the new projects and what are their scopes?
Good question. Typically in the past, we've only put together the project description, the requested CIP forms, so to speak, during the biennial budget process. We typically do not do those in the mid-year ones. We can write you up some descriptions and kind of scope the projects and those types of things. But I just wanted you to know why that wasn't included.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good explanation, Kevin. I would request that before the next meeting, if you could put together a PDF file with the old descriptions, just so we have that available, and certainly descriptions for the newly proposed projects, if you would.
Any other council comments to help facilitate information folks are looking for at the next discussion? All right, well, I just really want to thank the staff. I know it's supposed to be really easy to do the second year of the biennial budget, but with COVID and everything else we've been going through, it's been a bit harder. And so I just want to recognize all the work that's gone into it. So just to summarize, we're looking at seeing the paving budget restored next time, the capital projects for 2022 kind of being pulled together into a document for us, the old ones and any of the new ones. And some more discussion and proposal around the ongoing revenues not covering the ongoing operating costs. Did I summarize all of the things people are looking for correctly? All right, any other discussion on this topic tonight? All right, well, we will talk about it some more at a future meeting. Thank you, everyone. So the next up on our agenda, we have the police department basement improvement contracts. And so I'll turn it over to Megan Davis, our city manager, to hand it off to the appropriate staff person to give us a presentation.
I'm sorry, I think I Sorry, I think I unmuted somebody else instead of myself. I'm going to turn it over to Director Cora. He's going to give a really brief update on the project and kind of where we are now with this.
Great.
Okay, Mayor and Council. So I just shared my screen. I think it's just easiest to talk from the fiscal impact sheet. But essentially, this project's been discussed over a 2-year period. It's gone through some starts and stops with COVID and budget cuts, and then different configurations for different options of an option 1, a smaller scope, and option 2, a much larger scope, with like a community room and things like that. The last time we discussed this, the project was estimating just the scope of work around 650 to 700. Since the time we've talked, we've actually gotten hard pricing on things. We've gone through every contract and made sure they're up to date. We've had a lot of different folks involved on this project, but this page essentially summarizes it all. So this project is going to add a sleep room, I just lost the word, a lactation room, FM radio station, broadcasting and recording room, men's and women's locker rooms with showers, a multi-purpose room. It's going to bring communications, reliable communications for internet and data and radio down into the basement. It's also, by the way, gonna, even though those are the basics we're adding, it adds a whole new HVAC unit on the roof that serves this basement properly with proper ventilation. And then also what has been added to the project, not since we've talked, but since in the background, there's been water issues at this building, and we were working on water mitigation, and ultimately is determined we have a bigger problem than we can just mitigate through staff. So we've added water mitigation into this. Water seeps in through the basement. It has issues to do with the downspouts and some settling around the building, and a negative grade where water actually drains to the building. So we're correcting a lot of that. So you add all that up. We've got some amendments with our architect just for the various revisions they've done and for their construction administration. So we're recommending some amendments with Markley. Whitestone Construction, we're recommending a $710,000 contract with Whitestone. They were selected through an RFP process, and then they are in the middle and have mostly bought out the project, which means that they go out there and they talk to 3 different people for a certain trade, and they get pricing. They set that pricing with the lowest bidder, and they set schedule. So the buyout process has been very difficult in this environment, finding people that will do the work. And in addition, we've done so many revisions. We've just kind of gotten fatigued with subcontractors, but Whitestone has gone through a buyout process. We're recommending a contract with Global Cable, who will do a lot of the communications installation. We are recommending allowance for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Again, there's some more of the radio equipments in here, and then just basic furniture you need, different things. And then we're recommending an overall contingency of $71,000. So we hope through the buyout process, we might save a little bit of money from this. But right now, this is the number to build this improvement that's been prioritized through the capital improvement plan in the budget. It's been approved by council. It's been made a priority by the police chief. And so in order to accomplish the project based off what we have already budgeted, which is $25,000 for electrical work, $640,000 from the last conversation around the improvements, and another $27,500 for the communication for the emergency operations center. We need about another $300,000 for a budget amendment to complete the project. This has been valued engineered down to the bare bones basics. There's just a lot going on with it, with plumbing and electrical and HVAC. And so with that, if you want to move forward with the project, please approve these contracts. If you'd like to have further discussion about the project, we can do that as well.
Thank you, Director Coer. We'll go over to our members of the public and ask if they would care to comment on this agenda item tonight. Seeing none, that takes us back over to council. Councilmember Lipton.
Yes, thank you. Kurt, thank you for the presentation and the analysis. I'm at the point of saying that we better approve this and move forward before this grows any more than it already has. And I was just curious, where did this start? I mean, this has been on the list for so many years, and I'm just curious what the original budget was for this project that's now close to $1 million.
That's going way back in time, but I think at one point it started out probably $50,000 to $100,000 for just a basic bathroom. And then things such as communications and emergency operations and legal requirements for lactation rooms and various things layered up. And a lot of things have gotten more expensive in life, and we're at where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt we're at where we're at. Like I said, if we're committed to the project, we better do it now before it gets any more expensive. But I really would like to, use this as a learning opportunity, particularly for relatively new council members, to understand how these projects first get approved when it's proposed on the original capital budget, and then where we end up. And, it's disappointing that it went through all this. It is, like you said, it is what it is, but it should be a lesson learned, and hopefully the city and the council can learn something from this. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Lipton. Councilmember Lay.
Yeah, all the points that Councilmember Lipton just made are absolutely on target. I think, though, one thing in fairness, the scope of the project is substantially different from what we started with. Now, that's not to say I think that we, could have phased the first part, gotten it done, and we wouldn't be dealing with it now and so forth. But that I'm hoping, and the water mitigation and all that is, I think that's it's relatively recent compared certainly to the bathroom scope that we started with. So anyway, I don't want to be, I don't want to take away from what Councilmember Lipton said, but I also recognize that the project has grown quite a bit, and we are doing all at once, and we do need to get it done, so we don't have to manage it anymore.
Thanks, Councilmember Lay. I'm also supportive of approving the contracts tonight. I do have a couple questions. I always get concerned when a project grows in scope that things that are really important to us get value engineered out. And so I just want to confirm that, we're picking the most energy efficient HVAC system, that we haven't taken out energy efficiency upgrades and sustainability measures that we would do in this area in order to save on cost.
Those are all good questions. So this is going to have all the modern code. It will have LED lighting. HVAC units will be controlled by the building automation system, which will be integrated with all the other HVAC units. So it'll have all that. What it does not have is we just weren't at a point in the project or the point in this building's life cycle to do electric only HVAC. Everything was kind of pre-set up for natural gas. So I would say that's the only thing we haven't done in this case. But otherwise, I feel like, you are getting modern improvements with modern controls.
So does the panel have to be upgraded for this project?
This project has sub panels for all these improvements. So the main transformer and the main panels are not being upgraded. They're just sub panels for the one HVAC unit and sub panels for the basement electrical circuits. There's not a larger panel upgrade happening.
And so even with the solar carports that are in the budget, so with that project and this project, none of that is triggering the need for the panel to get upgraded?
Not at this point. So if we did this solar carport, that should be a net metering. So that should be energy going back in. So it would probably have a separate net metering sub panel for that system.
Okay, so if we do anything to trigger a need to upgrade the panel, I would, and I don't think we have time to do this kind of study or analysis now, But I think we need to ensure that we have capacity to do the electric HVAC and to be able to modify it. We need to be able to have charging for the police vehicles that are going to be electric. So I think that needs to just be on our radar for a future project. And consider that when you're doing the electrical now, that the plan will be to change the panel.
Yes, I agree. These topics have gained a lot of momentum. So I'm working with my facilities team and the sustainability team. So we're gonna likely be doing a mechanical electrical evaluation of all the buildings to try to get ahead of the game on what electrification really looks like. To get that into future budgets, and then also to study the facilities and understand just bulk charging and how that impacts things. So I think those things could all converge or have their own separate panels, but we need to learn a little more about all this to answer those questions. But we understand the need to figure this out and plan for it.
Okay, and so I'm gonna go out on a limb and just say that I would be comfortable giving direction to approve the contracts, but give direction to staff that if they can find a feasible route to doing an all electric HVAC on this install, that I would support doing that, you know, at a cost of up to 10% over what we've approved tonight. I don't know if the rest of the group has interest in entertaining that. And Director Kohr, I don't know if you were about to say, well, that's not even feasible, so don't bother. Director Kohr.
I just want to clarify all HVAC. So we're putting in a third unit, and so electrification for the third unit?
For the third unit.
Third unit.
For the unit you're touching, yeah.
Yeah. We can always ask our design team what that looks like, and if we can fit it in, we can bring you a cost and you can make that decision.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
So Mayor, I just have a question of your comment. So we're approving 300,000 additional. So you're saying an additional 30,000?
30,000, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it sounded, what Director Kohr said he could do sounded, you know, probably like a much more measured path, which is that they would ask, and then if it's possible, he would bring back that additional cost for our consideration. So that's probably even a much better idea than what I came up with. So that's my new proposal. Is that okay with folks? Great. And then just, I saw the chief is on. I don't know if he has access to microphone too, but I just want to, same sort of similar question to the chief. Did we have to value engineer out anything that is actually critical to what we were trying to accomplish?
Mayor, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, no, I'm good with Kurt's comments. We have what we need, and you know, eventually still want to add the community room and maybe another couple of sleep rooms, but we have what we need now, and nothing was value engineered out that would make the project unusable or hard to use.
Great. Any other questions from council members? All right, so I move we give staff direction to approve the contracts and to investigate if the third HVAC unit can be made all electric, and if it can, bring back additional cost for council to approve.
Second.
Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor, I guess we'll need a roll call vote. City Clerk Muth, could we please have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Lay? Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes. Sorry.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Yes.
Councilmember Lipton?
Yes.
Mayor Stolzman?
Yes.
Councilmember Fahey?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Next, we have ordinance number 1814, series 2021, an ordinance amending the city's disposable bag tax to provide a credit in the amount of the state carryout bag fee to be collected by retailers and otherwise align with the state carryout bag fee in order to reduce the administrative burden on the city's retailers. This is our first reading, and we'll set the public hearing for 9/21/2021. I'll move that we approve that. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor, please say yes. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, I'll move that we approve ordinance number 1815, series 2021, an ordinance approving a 7th amendment to the Dakota General Development Plan GDP to allow up to 59 dwelling units and 15,000 square feet of commercial development. This is our first reading. I'll set the public hearing for October 5th, 2021. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Next up, we have item G from the consent agenda, which is approval of proclamation designating every September as Louisville History Month. Councilmember Fahey, please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this was a proposal that is going to encourage residents of all ages to explore and increase their understanding of Louisville history. So the proposal, the proclamation itself states, whereas the Louisville Historical Museum, the museum, opened its doors on Labor Day weekend, the month of September 1986. And whereas September 2021 marks the 35th anniversary of the museum's opening to the public at its historical campus on Main Street, preserving historic photos and other artifacts, conducting research, sharing information through educational programs for all ages, uncovering new perspectives, supporting city initiatives with relevant information, and enriching the lives of all residents. And whereas the museum's mission calls upon all Louisville residents to be a part of the story of Louisville. And whereas the city of Louisville recognizes its museum as being a crucial cultural asset that promotes community engagement and contributes to a strong sense of place. And whereas history is an important avenue for understanding a community over time and for making Louisville a more inclusive and equitable place. And whereas the city of Louisville wishes to foster a community that values education through history and historical analysis, and awareness of Louisville's complex history can always be increased in the community and can inform situations in the present. And whereas an annual month-long celebration would provide an opportunity for the museum to feature and promote new Louisville history research and highlight new offerings and encourage residents of all ages to participate in learning about their community's history. And whereas in requesting that the City Council proclaim the month of September as Louisville History Month, the museum has the support and approval of both the Louisville Historical Commission and the museum's supporting 501c3, the Louisville History Foundation. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of Louisville, Colorado, that September 2021 and every month of September is recognized as Louisville History Month, and that all residents of Louisville are urged to be a part of the Louisville story by increasing their understanding of Louisville's complex and rich history. Dated the 7th day of September 2021.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. The motion carries. And so that takes us to our city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report this evening.
Thank you, City Attorney Kelly. Next, we have council comments, committee reports, and identification of future agenda items. Are there any identification of future agenda items first off? Oh, Councilmember Dickinson.
Put my hand down for.
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to go out of order to see if anyone's paying it. All right, any committee reports with pressing updates? Councilmember Dickinson.
It would appear that we're going to move the Economic Vitality Committee meeting from this Friday, or sorry, from Friday the 17th to Friday the 24th. So just for anyone who's tuning in, I think we'll be moving that by 1 week.
Thank you. Any other committee reports that should be made this evening? All right, just trying to make sure I give adequate time for people to think about it. I just have one council comment. So just something to reflect on. There just have been a lot of really positive public engagements in free speech in the last year. The protest at Cottonwood Park around Black Lives Matters was really meaningful. Community members were able to march from there to the police station and talk to one another and grieve. And I think that having those outlets where there are meaningful, productive ways for people to participate in speech has really served us well in keeping acts of violence and vandalism and graffiti down. And in light of some of the actions in Texas and other states really restricting women's rights and access to public health care for women, I think it might be appropriate for the council to consider some avenues for discussion and grieving and positive outlets where people can voice and communicate their concerns and actions they want to see public leaders take. So I just think it might be appropriate for us to create that space so that people are engaging in appropriate behaviors and that there's a space for those kinds of conversations. I know we did a lot to promote artwork and poetry and other things in other situations. So I think perhaps we could promote some of those things, promote literature at the library like we did similarly throughout other very trying and hard times in the last year. So I think we may have created a vacuum and not addressed this spot or talked about it at all. So I do think some of the responsibility of the vandalism could fall onto the vacuum that we've created, and I think we could work to address that. Thank you. Any other council comments? Councilmember Lay.
Sorry about that. I guess I wanted to piggyback on a comment that Councilmember Fahey just made. I spent a little time last night after the parade, just doing a little history research of my own using the city's website, and came on, and I don't know why I had not focused on this before, but there is something called History at Home, and I just wanted to encourage family members, teachers, just people who are interested to go on there. There are some really extraordinary materials, including some videos done by our own libraries and museum staff around really important parts of Louisville history, including the two big mine strikes, one in 1913 and 14, and 1910 to 14, and then another in 1927, folding into 1928. And there's stuff on the Klan in our city. The city's had a really interesting, rich history, good and bad. There's so many lessons that I think, along with what the mayor was just saying, we can actually carry forward into some of the dialogue that I think is really going to be constructive in acknowledging difficult places that certain groups have been, clashing views, accommodations, and just downright conflict that hasn't necessarily been resolved. And I was really proud. I felt like if I had been going to some other community's library and looking at this, I would have said, wow, this is really cool. And it's our library and it's our system and we're funding it. And the people of the city are funding it through their tax dollars. So I wanted to say thank you to staff, to the people who've made all of the contributions that they have, because it's community members, historical commission. It's been a lot of people over a lot of years. And anyway, I encourage people to do it. Thanks.
Councilmember Lay. Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on what Councilor Lay just mentioned, that the staff at the museum and the library have done a fabulous job in promoting and researching and then making that information accessible on all the good, the bad, and the ugly about Louisville history. And it's helpful to get all sides of the information. And then on a more joyful, happy note, I want to remind everyone that the historic baseball game is happening this Saturday at Miners Field. So I encourage everyone to come. First 100 people who get there get a free t-shirt, and there's going to be Cracker Jacks.
Thanks, Councilmember Fahey. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add my voice. I didn't get a chance to speak earlier about some of the horrific events that we've been experiencing, both in our town as well as sort of experiencing remotely from the state of Texas. I want to say first off that it's if you're not horrified by what's going on in the state of Texas regarding both sort of bodily autonomy for especially women, as well as voting rights, then you're not paying attention. But I also want to say that just as I was horrified by the actions of a very small subset of individuals who used violence and graffiti last year in demonstrations at the state capitol building, I am also horrified by what went on today or this weekend, and these are not equivalent outrages. Obviously, I am very much in support of in providing space for community conversations, especially around some of these events that are so hard to process and for our community to process, and that we can take responsibility as council members and as leaders of our community in engaging with our community and providing those spaces. So I absolutely do not and cannot condone the kind of actions that took place in Louisville over the weekend. But I do want to make sure that folks understand that there is a way to protest the injustices that are happening in the state of Texas, and it is not through violence and through graffiti.
Thanks, Councilmember Brown. Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate those comments, Kyle, and I appreciate your comments to lead off that conversation, Mayor. And I just actually wanted to add my experience of Pine after the parade. There's some confetti explosions after, like towards the end of the parade, and there's just this big crazy mess. And walking away from the parade and commenting to someone said to me, "You gonna clean that up?" Like, because I'm on council. I'm like, "Oh, don't worry, that will be clean by like noon." I went back there later in the day, and my goodness, did the city just do a magnificent job of setting it all up, breaking it all down, cleaning it all up. Other than the porta potties that hadn't been picked up yet, you couldn't even tell anything was there. And maybe now we just have porta potties forever. Maybe that's a permanent. You can just stop and go to the bathroom anytime you want. But just kudos to everyone in the city that worked on that parade. Not just the fun parts, but also the cleaning up afterward and how quickly you guys brought it back to its beautiful state. So thank you so much.
Thanks for that, Councilmember Dickinson. What a good way to end our meeting. So I think we'll end on that positive note. We're adjourned. See you next week.